Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. We're thankful for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Foundations. Dominic Hawthorne wiped sweat from his brow as he hammered the final nail into the custom bookshelf he'd built for his son's bedroom. At 42, his calloused hands told the story of a man who had built his life from nothing, literally. 20 years ago, he'd been a construction worker with ambition but little else. Now he owned Hawthorne Construction, one of the most respected custom home builders in the Pacific Northwest. "That looks amazing, Daddy," Tommy exclaimed, running his small hands over the smooth oak surface. "Only the best for you, buddy," Dominic replied, ruffling his 8-year-old son's dark hair, the same shade as his own. "You've got your mother's eyes, but thank God you got my handyman genes." Tommy giggled and began arranging his books on the shelves. Dominic watched him, a tightness forming in his chest. Something was off in his home, and it had been for months. His wife, Olivia, was distant, constantly checking her phone and working late at her interior design firm. The business had taken off after she'd landed several contracts designing high-end apartments for Meridian Properties, a development company run by Alastair Pierce. Dominic had met Pierce exactly twice. The first time at a charity gala where Olivia had introduced them, and Pierce had barely acknowledged Dominic's existence, his eyes lingering too long on Olivia's low-cut dress. The second time was 3 months ago, when Dominic had surprised Olivia at her office with lunch and found Pierce leaning too close to her at her desk, both of them laughing at something on her computer screen. Something in Pierce's smile made Dominic's skin crawl. "Daddy, can we have pizza for dinner?" Tommy asked, breaking into his thoughts. "Sure, buddy. Let's go ask your mom." Dominic found Olivia in their bedroom, applying makeup even though it was nearly 7 p.m. on a Wednesday. "Tommy wants pizza for dinner," he said from the doorway. Olivia startled slightly, her hand jerking and smudging her eyeliner. "Jesus, Dom, you scared me. Sorry. Didn't realize applying war paint required such concentration." She shot him an irritated look. "I told you this morning, I have a client meeting tonight. At 7 p.m.? "Yes, at 7 p.m. Alastair's investors are in town, and he wants me to walk them through the design concept for the new lakeside development." Dominic leaned against the doorframe. "Alastair, huh? First name basis with the boss now." "Don't start, Dom." She blotted her lipstick. "This is a huge opportunity. The lakeside project could double my firm's revenue. And Alastair couldn't schedule this meeting during business hours? His investors are only in town tonight." She stood, smoothing down her form-fitting black dress. "I won't be late. Probably home by 10. Dominic watched as she gathered her portfolio and phone. Tommy's looking forward to pizza with both his parents. Guilt flashed across her face, but was quickly replaced by determination. "We'll have family dinner tomorrow. I promise." After she left, Dominic ordered pizza and ate with Tommy, helping with homework and tucking him into bed. Then he sat alone in his home office, nursing a whiskey and staring at the motion-activated security app on his phone. He'd installed the system himself after a break-in at a neighbor's house. The cameras covered every entrance to their property, including the driveway. At 10:30 p.m., his phone buzzed with an alert. A car was pulling into their driveway, a sleek black Audi he recognized as Alastair Pierce's. Dominic watched the grainy night vision footage as Pierce and Olivia sat in the car for 7 minutes. There was no mistaking their silhouettes moving closer together, their heads joining in what could only be a kiss. Dominic didn't slam his fist into the wall. He didn't throw his glass across the room. Instead, he took a screenshot, sent it to his private email, and poured another finger of whiskey. His father had taught him that a man never loses his temper. He channels his rage into action. By midnight, Olivia still hadn't returned. Dominic went to bed, lying awake until 1:23 a.m. when he heard her key in the door. She slipped into bed 30 minutes later, smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his. Dominic closed his eyes, his mind already calculating. Alastair Pierce had just made the worst mistake of his life, and Olivia would soon learn that betraying Dominic Hawthorne wasn't just breaking a vow. It was declaring war. Chapter 2, discoveries. For 6 weeks, Dominic continued as if nothing had changed. He built shelves, attended Tommy's soccer games, and kissed Olivia goodbye each morning. But every night, he gathered evidence. Screenshots from the security cameras, GPS location from the family iPad that Olivia sometimes forgot was linked to her phone, and carefully documented timelines of her late meetings and weekend design emergencies. It was Tommy who unwittingly provided the final piece of the puzzle. "Dad, can you help me with my social studies project?" he asked one Saturday morning while Olivia was supposedly at a design conference in Portland. "Sure, buddy. What's the topic?" "We're making family trees. I need pictures of everyone." Dominic helped Tommy gather photos from their family albums and digital archives. As Tommy sorted through images on Dominic's laptop, he clicked on a folder labeled Property Photos. "Is this our house being built?" Tommy asked, pointing to construction images. "That's right. I took pictures of every stage." Tommy scrolled through photos of foundation pouring, framing, and roofing. Then he stopped on an image of Dominic standing with his original business partner, Floyd Callahan. "Who's that, Dad?" Dominic felt a familiar pang at the sight of Floyd, the man who'd helped him start Hawthorne Construction, only to abruptly sell his stake in the company 3 years ago after a mysterious financial windfall. "That's Floyd. He used to work with me. He looks like Mr. Pierce." Dominic froze. "What did you say?" "He looks like Mr. Pierce. Mom's friend who gave me that cool drone for my birthday last month." Dominic kept his voice casual. "You've met Mr. Pierce?" Tommy nodded. "He came to the house once when you were in Chicago. Mom said it was for work, but they were just laughing and drinking wine." Dominic's mind raced. Floyd and Pierce, both tall with salt and pepper hair, both with connections to Olivia. It couldn't be coincidence. "Tommy, let's take a break. I need to check something for work." While Tommy played video games, Dominic dove into research. It took just 30 minutes to discover that Meridian Properties, Pierce's company, had purchased 3 parcels of land in the last 3 years that Hawthorne Construction had been poised to develop. Each time, they'd been outbid at the last minute by an anonymous buyer that turned out to be Meridian. And each time, Floyd had been involved in the preliminary site assessments. The pieces clicked into place. Floyd had been feeding inside information to Pierce, who was using Olivia to get it. The affair wasn't just personal betrayal. It was industrial espionage. Dominic called his attorney, Russell Davidson. "Russ, I need you to quietly pull all documents related to Floyd's departure. And I need to know if Meridian Properties has any financial connection to him." 2 days later, Russell confirmed what Dominic had suspected. Floyd had received a consulting fee of $250,000 from Shell Company owned by Meridian Properties right before selling his stake in Hawthorne Construction. That night, Dominic sat across from Olivia at dinner, watching her push food around her plate while checking her phone under the table. "You seem distracted," he commented. "Just stressed about work." She didn't meet his eyes. "Anything I can help with?" She shook her head. "It's complicated. Design stuff. Alistair, keeping you busy?" Her eyes flicked up at the mention of Pierce's name. "The whole team is swamped with the Lakeside project." "Funny thing," Dominic said casually, "I almost bid on that Lakeside property last year. Beautiful location. Someone outbid us at the last minute." Olivia's fork clattered against her plate. "Really? You never mentioned that. Didn't seem important at the time." He smiled and took a sip of water. "How's Alistair's wife, by the way? Gwen, right? I heard she's on some charity board with Senator Walsh's wife." Olivia paled slightly. "I wouldn't know. We don't discuss personal matters." Dominic nodded, filing away her reaction. "Of course not. Strictly professional." Later that night, he made a call to an old friend from his construction days who now worked for the city planning department. By morning, he had digital copies of all permit applications for the Lakeside development. By afternoon, he discovered 3 critical code violations in Meridian's plans that had somehow been overlooked by inspectors. Dominic wasn't just gathering ammunition. He was building the foundation for a demolition so complete that when it was over, no one would even remember there had once been something standing in its place. Chapter 3. Strategy. Dominic stared at the chessboard on his desk, his fingers hovering over a knight. Across from him sat Howard Bellamy, his oldest friend and the only person besides his lawyer who knew what Olivia had done. You're thinking too hard, Howard said. Sometimes the simplest move is the best. Simple moves are predictable, Dominic replied, finally moving his bishop instead. And I can't afford to be predictable right now. Howard leaned back in his chair, studying the board. Have you considered just confronting her? Divorce her, take half, move on with your life? This isn't about money. It's always about money, Dom. No. Dominic's voice hardened. It's about respect. About consequences. Pierce didn't just take my wife. He and Floyd systematically undercut my business, using Olivia as their spy. They need to understand what happens when you betray Dominic Hawthorne. Howard moved his queen. Check. Dominic blocked with a pawn without hesitation. I'm not just going to divorce Olivia. I'm going to dismantle everything she and Pierce thought they were building. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Pierce has connections. His brother-in-law is Deputy Mayor Nelson, which is precisely why he's been able to slide past building inspections and zoning regulations. Dominic reached for a folder and handed Howard several documents. But not everything can be hidden with a well-placed bribe. Howard reviewed the papers, his eyes widening. These geological surveys. The lakeside property has significant soil stability issues that Pierce's team deliberately concealed when they submitted their permit applications. They're building a 50-unit luxury development on land that could experience liquefaction in an earthquake. Jesus, that's not just unethical, it's criminal. Exactly. Dominic took Howard's night. And that's just the beginning. Over the next hour, Dominic outlined his plan. First, he would continue gathering evidence of Meridian's permit violations and code shortcuts. Second, he would secure his finances, discreetly moving assets to protect them from the coming divorce. Third, he would leverage his connections to buy strategic properties surrounding the lakeside development, effectively controlling access to utilities and road improvements the project would need. What about Olivia and Tommy? Howard asked. You're talking about destroying their future too. Dominic's expression darkened. I've already arranged for Tommy's financial security. I've established a trust fund in his name that neither Olivia nor I can touch. As for Olivia, he moved his rook. She made her choice when she decided to betray me with Pierce. She just didn't understand the consequences of that choice. And what about Floyd, your old partner? Floyd will learn that loyalty isn't just a word you toss around at company barbecues. Dominic's smile didn't reach his eyes. He sold out for $250,000. What he doesn't know is that the information he gave Pierce was incomplete. The structural plans for our major projects were modified after his departure. Any building using those specifications would have serious issues within 5 years. Howard looked troubled. That's extreme, Dom. No, it's justice. Pierce and Olivia didn't just have an affair. They systematically worked to undermine everything I've built. They used my son's mother as a weapon against me. Dominic moved his queen. Checkmate in 3 moves. Howard studied the board, then looked up at his friend with concern. You've changed, Dom. No. Dominic stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city. I've simply stopped pretending to be someone I'm not. My father built houses for 40 years. He taught me that the foundation determines whether a structure stands or falls. Pierce, Floyd, and Olivia built their plans on a foundation of betrayal. Now they'll watch it crumble. That night, after tucking Tommy into bed, Dominic found Olivia in their bedroom, packing an overnight bag. Going somewhere? He asked, leaning against the doorframe. Design retreat in Astoria for the weekend. I told you last week. She didn't meet his eyes. No, you didn't. She paused, then continued packing. I must have forgotten. It came up suddenly. Seems like a lot of things come up suddenly these days. She zipped the bag shut. What's that supposed to mean? Dominic smiled, the kind of smile that should have warned her. Nothing. Enjoy Astoria. The weather's supposed to be beautiful. Almost as beautiful as the view from Pierce's beach house in Cannon Beach. Olivia froze, her knuckles whitening around the handle of her bag. What are you talking about? Just making conversation. Tell Alistair I said hello. She stared at him, her face drained of color. Dom, don't worry, he said softly. Tommy and I will have a great weekend. I'm thinking of taking him fishing. Building memories, you know? the kind that last. For a moment, fear flickered in her eyes. Then she gathered herself. We should talk when I get back. Oh, we definitely will. Dominic stepped aside to let her pass. Have a wonderful weekend, Olivia. Make the most of it. As her car pulled out of the driveway, Dominic returned to his office and opened his laptop. The blinking dot on the GPS tracker he'd placed under her car confirmed she was heading toward the coast, not north to Astoria. He picked up his phone and dialed. Russell, it's time to move forward with the property acquisitions around Lakeside, and I need you to file those preliminary divorce papers on Monday. Yes, with the sealed evidence appendix. She'll be served when she returns from her weekend getaway. Dominic ended the call and turned to the wall map, where he'd marked Pierce's properties and developments. One by one, he began placing red pins on strategic locations, the first visible markers of a plan that had been forming in his mind for months. The war had officially begun. Chapter 4. Execution. The following Monday, Dominic sat in his office reviewing blueprints when his phone rang. Olivia's name flashed on the screen. He let go to voicemail. 3 minutes later, it rang again. And again. By the fourth call, he picked up. You had me served with divorce papers at my office? Her voice trembled with fury and shock. I thought your workplace was appropriate, considering it's where our marriage died. You can't do this. The allegations in these papers are all documented and verified, Dominic finished for her. The infidelity, the corporate espionage, the breach of fiduciary duty to our family businesses. Russell's team has been building the case for months. A long silence followed. When Olivia spoke again, her voice had changed from anger to calculation. What do you want, Dom? Money? The house? Name your price. Dominic laughed softly. That's the difference between us, Olivia. You think everything has a price. Some things can't be bought back. Is this about Alistair? It was a mistake. I can end it. Too late. He kept his voice even, emotionless. Check your email. I've attached the complete evidence package, including the reports proving you and Pierce used information from Floyd to undercut Hawthorne construction on multiple projects. The same package is being delivered to the Ethics Committee of the Architectural Design Association this afternoon. I imagine your license will be under review by the end of the week. You would destroy my career? Her voice cracked. What about Tommy? Think about what this will do to him. I'm always thinking about Tommy. That's why I've arranged for full custody. Your visitation rights will depend on the court's assessment of your stability and judgment. You can't take my son. Actually, I can, and I will. The evidence of you using Tommy as cover for your meetings with Pierce is particularly disturbing. The text messages where you discuss how to manipulate our son's schedule to create alibis for your rendezvous won't play well before Judge Martinez. Another long silence. Then what about Pierce? Does he know? Pierce will learn his lesson separately, though I imagine his investors might be calling soon. Those structural issues with the Lakeside project are becoming common knowledge in certain circles. Dom, please. Her voice softened, attempting the conciliatory tone that had worked on him so many times before. We can talk about this. Work something out. We're past talking, Olivia. In fact, we're past everything except the consequences of your choices. He checked his watch. I have a meeting. Tommy will be staying with me at the lake house until the custody hearing. His things are already there. You have until Friday to remove your personal belongings from the house. Anything left will be donated. The lake house. Her voice rose. But that's mine. Always was. It's in my family trust, not our marital property. He allowed himself a small smile. You might want to check the ownership of your design firm's office building, too. Russell completed that acquisition last month. He ended the call and turned to the window, watching the Seattle skyline as gray clouds gathered over Puget Sound. His phone immediately began buzzing with text messages from Olivia, alternating between threats and pleas. He blocked her number and continued reviewing the blueprints for his newest project, a community center being built on land directly adjacent to Pierce's Lakeside development. By Wednesday, the ripples of Dominic's actions had become waves. The Architectural Design Association had suspended Olivia's license pending investigation. 2 of Meridian Properties' investors had pulled out of the Lakeside project after receiving anonymous packets containing geological surveys and structural assessments. And Floyd Callahan had been served with a civil suit alleging breach of contract and corporate espionage. On Thursday, Dominic received a call from an unfamiliar number. Hawthorne. He answered curtly. This is Alistair Pierce. The voice was tight with controlled rage. We need to talk. I don't believe we have anything to discuss. Listen, you vindictive bastard. I don't know what game you're playing, but it stops now, before we both end up destroying each other. Dominic leaned back in his chair. That's where you're wrong, Pierce. I'm not playing a game, and there's no both here. Only you, watching everything you've built turn to ash. Is this about Olivia? Fine. It's over. I've ended it. She meant nothing. Good to know. I'm sure she'll appreciate hearing that. Pierce's voice lowered. What do you want? Money? A partnership? Name it. What I want, Dominic said slowly, is for you to experience what it feels like when someone systematically dismantles your life's work. When everything you value is taken from you by someone you trusted. You're insane. No, I'm patient and thorough. Dominic checked his calendar. By the way, how's the meeting with the bank going today? I heard Lakeside's construction loan is under review. Pierce's breathing audibly quickened. How did you? I know everything, Alistair. Your shell companies. The bribes to building inspectors. The falsified environmental impact statements. The fact that your brother-in-law, Deputy Mayor Nelson, helped fast-track permits for projects that didn't meet code. You can't prove any of that. I already have. Check tomorrow's Seattle Times. Front page, above the fold. Developers' empire built on quicksand. Corruption in Seattle's building department exposed. The line went silent, except for Pierce's ragged breathing. One more thing, Dominic added. Tommy's birthday party is next Saturday. He's turning 9. The invitation sent to your house was a mistake. Please don't attend. Dominic hung up and swiveled his chair to face Howard, who had been sitting silently across the desk. Was that necessary? Howard asked, mentioning the boys' party. Everything I do is necessary. Dominic handed him a folder. These are the final documents for the property transfer. Once signed, the land surrounding Lakeside will be owned by Tommy's trust. Howard reviewed the papers. You're putting all of this in Tommy's name? The access roads, the utility corridors. Pierce will have to negotiate with my son's trustees to complete his development, or abandon the project entirely. And who are the trustees? Dominic smiled thinly. You and Russell, with explicit instructions never to approve any request from Meridian Properties or its subsidiaries. Howard shook his head. The level of detail in this revenge plan is disturbing, Dom. It's not revenge. It's justice. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, you're becoming as ruthless as the people who betrayed you. Dominic's expression hardened. The difference is I never drew first blood. I never betrayed a partner or broke a vow. Everything that happens now is simply the natural consequence of their actions. That evening, as Dominic helped Tommy with homework at the lake house, his phone rang with Russell's familiar number. It's done, Russell said without preamble. The Seattle Times is running the story tomorrow. The FBI has opened a preliminary investigation into Nelson and the building department. And Floyd Callahan has agreed to testify against Pierce in exchange for dropping our civil suit. Perfect. Dominic glanced at Tommy, happily drawing at the kitchen table. And the other matter? For Tommy's birthday. The paperwork is complete. The deed will be delivered as arranged. It's quite the gift, Dom. He deserves everything. Dominic's voice softened watching his son. After what they put him through, using him as a pawn in their game, he deserves to know his father would move mountains for him. After ending the call, Dominic joined Tommy at the table. How's the drawing coming, buddy? Good. It's our family tree for school. Tommy pushed the paper toward him. See? That's you and me at the top. Dominic noticed that Tommy had drawn only 2 figures at the top of the tree, with Olivia noticeably absent. Buddy, you know your mom loves you, right? Even with everything that's happening. Tommy's small face grew serious. Is Mom in trouble? I heard her crying on the phone with Mr. Pierce. Dominic chose his words carefully. Your mom made some choices that have consequences. But nothing changes how much we both love you. Is that why we're staying at the lake house? Because of Mom's choices? Partly. Dominic put his arm around Tommy's shoulders. But also because I thought we could use some father-son time before your birthday party. Tommy brightened. Is everyone still coming? Absolutely. And I have a special surprise planned. Dominic tapped the drawing. Maybe you should add a spot for your future. We want to build someday. As Tommy excitedly added to his drawing, Dominic gazed out at the lake, watching the last light fade from the sky. By this time next week, Pierce's reputation would be in tatters, Olivia's career would be effectively over, and Floyd would be testifying before a grand jury investigating corruption in the building department. And Tommy, innocent Tommy who had been used as an unwitting pawn in their schemes, would receive a birthday gift that would secure his future in ways Olivia and Pierce could never imagine. Chapter 5, Consequences. The Seattle Times headline was even more damning than Dominic had anticipated. Corruption exposed. Developers' empire linked to bribes, falsified permits. The front page story detailed how Meridian Properties had systematically bribed officials to overlook safety violations and bypass environmental regulations. Deputy Mayor Nelson had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation, and 3 building inspectors had been suspended. Dominic read the article twice over breakfast, then set it aside as Tommy came into the kitchen. Dad, can we go fishing today? Absolutely, buddy. Right after I make a quick call. In his office, Dominic dialed Russell's number. Have you heard from Pierce's attorneys? They're in full damage control mode, Russell replied. They've requested a meeting to discuss, and I quote, mutually beneficial resolutions to ongoing disputes. Decline the meeting. I have no interest in resolution. Dom, from a legal standpoint, it might be wise to at least hear what they're offering. What they're offering, Dominic said coldly, is desperation. Pierce is watching his empire crumble. His investors are fleeing. The banks have frozen his construction loans. His wife has filed for divorce after learning about Olivia. He's hoping to negotiate his way out of consequences. And you're not interested in negotiation? I'm interested in completion. The job isn't finished yet. After ending the call, Dominic took Tommy fishing. They spent the day on the lake, catching trout and talking about school, friends, and Tommy's upcoming birthday. For a few hours, Dominic allowed himself to forget about revenge and simply be a father. But that evening, reality intruded. As Tommy played video games, Dominic received a text from an unknown number. You've made your point. Let's talk. For Tommy's sake. Oh. Dominic blocked the number without responding. Then another text from a different number. This has gone far enough. You're destroying lives. Meet me tomorrow at 2 p.m. The usual coffee shop. He blocked that number too, but the interruption had soured his mood. Tommy noticed his father's darkened expression. Is everything okay, Dad? Dominic forced a smile. Everything's fine, buddy. Just some work stuff. How about we make some popcorn and watch a movie? Later that night, after Tommy was asleep, Dominic sat on the deck overlooking the moonlit lake. His phone rang. Howard. Pierce showed up in my office today, Howard said without greeting. He looked desperate, Dom. Said he wanted to make amends. Offered to sign over his interest in the lakeside property to Tommy's trust. And what did you tell him? That any offers needed to go through your attorneys. But Dom, the man is on the edge. The FBI raided his offices this morning. His wife has filed for full custody of their children and a restraining order. Olivia has been calling him nonstop, blaming him for everything. Sounds like things are progressing exactly as planned. Howard's voice lowered. He mentioned something else. Said Olivia told him you had security footage of them together. That you'd known about the affair for months, but kept silent, gathering evidence. Is that a question? It's a concern. This calculated approach, it's not like you, Dom. Maybe you never really knew me. Dominic watched the water ripple under the breeze. Maybe none of them did. What happens after Tommy's birthday party? After this grand finale you've planned? I rebuild. Tommy and I start fresh. Pierce, Olivia, and Floyd live with what's left of their lives. And that's enough for you? Destroying them completely? Dominic's voice hardened. They didn't just have an affair, Howard. They conspired to undermine my business. They used my son as cover for their meetings. They laughed about how easily they were manipulating me. I have the texts, the emails, the recorded conversations. So yes, complete destruction is exactly what they deserve. The day before Tommy's birthday, Dominic met with Judge Martinez in chambers, accompanied by Russell. They presented evidence of Olivia's involvement in the business espionage, the text messages discussing using Tommy as an alibi, and documentation of her increasingly erratic behavior since being served divorce papers. Mr. Hawthorne, Judge Martinez said after reviewing the evidence, "While these materials are certainly troubling, I'm concerned about your request for emergency, full custody with supervised visitation only. That's an extreme measure." "Your Honor," Dominic replied calmly, "I've never interfered with Olivia's relationship with our son. I've encouraged it, even knowing what I know. But her recent behavior has become increasingly unpredictable. She's appeared at Tommy's school twice, attempting to remove him without authorization. She sent him disturbing late-night text messages blaming me for destroying their family." The judge frowned. "Those texts are concerning. Tommy's welfare is my only concern. I'm not seeking to punish Olivia by limiting her access to our son. I'm seeking to protect him from the fallout of her choices until she stabilizes." After further discussion, Judge Martinez signed the emergency custody order. Olivia would be permitted supervised visitation only, pending a full hearing after psychiatric evaluation. As they left the courthouse, Russell glanced at Dominic. "That went better than expected. Martinez is usually more hesitant with emergency orders." The evidence was compelling. Dominic checked his watch. "Is everything arranged for tomorrow?" "Yes. The delivery will arrive at 2 p.m., as requested, and the documents are prepared exactly as you specified." Dominic nodded. "Perfect. Tommy deserves to know that his future is secure, regardless of what happens between his mother and me." That night, Dominic tucked Tommy into bed at the lake house. "Big day tomorrow, buddy. 9 years old. Practically a grown-up." Tommy grinned sleepily. "Will Mom be at my party?" "Yes, she'll be there." Dominic smoothed Tommy's hair. "And lots of your friends. And a very special surprise. Better than last year's drone from Mr. Pierce?" Something cold flickered in Dominic's eyes, quickly masked. "Much better. Something no one can ever take away from you." As Tommy drifted off to sleep, Dominic returned to the deck with a glass of whiskey. His phone showed 6 missed calls from Olivia, 3 from Pierce, and 1 from Floyd. He deleted them all without listening to the voicemails. Tomorrow, the foundation he'd been meticulously building for months would finally support the full weight of his justice. And everyone who had betrayed him would understand exactly who Dominic Hawthorne really was. Chapter 6, Revelations. Tommy's birthday dawned bright and clear. Dominic spent the morning setting up decorations at their main house. Balloons, streamers, and a space-themed cake, Tommy's latest obsession. The party was scheduled for 1 p.m., with the special delivery arranged for 2 p.m. At noon, Dominic received a call from the security company monitoring the property. "Mr. Hawthorne, we have an unauthorized entry attempt at your rear gate. A Ms. Olivia Hawthorne is trying to access the property before the designated time." "Is she alone?" "Yes, sir. Allow her entry, but monitor her movements." 15 minutes later, Olivia stormed into the kitchen where Dominic was arranging snacks. "How dare you get an emergency custody order?" Her eyes were red-rimmed, her normally perfect appearance disheveled. "Supervised visitation? Psychiatric evaluation? You're trying to make me look crazy." Dominic continued arranging fruit on a platter. "The evidence speaks for itself, Olivia. Your behavior has been erratic and potentially harmful to Tommy, because you've systematically destroyed everything in my life. My career, my reputation, your affair." Dominic finally looked at her. "Your conspiracy with Pierce to undermine my business? Your use of our son as cover for your meetings?" She faltered momentarily, then rallied. "It wasn't like that. Alistair and we fell in love. It happens, Dom. Marriages end. But this scorched earth campaign you've launched, it's insane. No, what's insane is thinking you could betray me and face no consequences." He kept his voice calm, almost conversational. "Did you really believe I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't protect what's mine? Tommy is not a possession. On that, we agree." Dominic checked his watch. "Guests will be arriving soon. You're welcome to stay for the party. Tommy wants you here. But if you cause a scene, security will escort you out." Olivia's shoulders slumped. "What happened to you, Dom? You were never this cold, this calculating. I was always this person. You just never gave me reason to show it. He handed her a stack of plates. Make yourself useful. The children's table needs setting. For the next hour, they worked in silent tension, preparing for the party. Guests began arriving. Tommy's friends from school, Howard and his family, Russell and his wife, and various neighbors and friends. Tommy excitedly greeted everyone, proudly showing off his space-themed decorations. At 1:45 p.m., a commotion at the front door drew Dominic's attention. Alistair Pierce was arguing with the security guard. "Sir, you're not on the approved guest list," the guard was saying. "This is ridiculous. I was invited. Ask Olivia." Dominic approached. "Is there a problem?" Pierce turned, his handsome face haggard with stress. "Dominic, be reasonable. I just want to give Tommy his gift." "You weren't invited, Alistair," Olivia said. "Olivia doesn't make those decisions anymore." Dominic's voice was quiet but firm. "Tommy's party is for family and friends. You're neither." Pierce's expression hardened. "This vendetta has gone far enough. You've destroyed my company, my marriage, my reputation. What more do you want? I want you to leave. Now." For a moment, it seemed Pierce might argue further. Then his shoulders sagged. "Fine, but this isn't over, Hawthorne. No one can sustain the level of malice you've demonstrated without it eventually consuming them." As Pierce turned to leave, Tommy spotted him from across the yard. "Mr. Pierce, did you bring another cool present like last year?" The adults froze. Pierce recovered first, forcing a smile. "Not this year, Tommy. I just stopped by to wish you happy birthday." Olivia hurried over, positioning herself protectively near Tommy. "Alistair was just leaving, honey." Tommy looked confused. "But Dad said Mr. Pierce gave you rides to work sometimes. Can't he stay for cake?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Dominic stepped forward. "Tommy, why don't you show your friends the new telescope on the deck? It's all set up." As Tommy led his friends away, Pierce and Olivia exchanged panicked glances. Dominic merely watched them, his expression unreadable. "How long have you known?" Olivia whispered. "Long enough." Dominic checked his watch again. "Mr. Pierce should leave now. The delivery will be arriving soon." "What delivery?" Pierce demanded. Before Dominic could answer, the security guard approached again. "Mr. Hawthorne, there's a delivery person at the gate. Says he has a package for Master Tommy that requires signature." Perfect timing. "Let him through." A few minutes later, a uniformed delivery man entered the backyard carrying a large envelope. "Package from Master Tommy, from a Mr. Jonathan. It seems to be the deed to—" Dominic interrupted smoothly. "Tommy, come here, buddy. You have a special delivery." Tommy ran over excitedly. "What is it, Dad?" "It's from your grandfather, Jonathan. Remember I told you about him?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "Your dad who died before I was born." "That's right. Before he passed, he set up something special for you. Something that would be given to you on your 9th birthday." Olivia approached, confusion evident on her face. "Dom, what is this about?" "Your father never." "Actually, he did." Dominic turned to the delivery man. "Please read the full delivery notice." The man cleared his throat. "Package from Master Tommy, from a Mr. Jonathan Hawthorne, posthumously delivered as instructed. It seems to be the deed to Hawthorne Lake and all surrounding properties, totaling 500 acres, including Lakeside Peninsula, now registered in the Hawthorne Family Trust with Thomas Hawthorne named as primary beneficiary." Olivia's jaw dropped. Pierce, who had lingered despite being asked to leave, went pale. "Lakeside Peninsula?" Pierce repeated. That's where my development is being built?" "Yes." Dominic smiled coldly. "Or rather, was being built. The trust now owns the land, the access roads, and the utility corridors. And the trustees, Howard and Russell, have clear instructions about development restrictions." Tommy was looking at the large envelope in confusion. "On a lake." Dominic knelt beside him. "You own the lake where we've been staying, buddy. Your grandfather wanted you to have it when you were old enough to appreciate it. It means no one can ever take it away from you." Pierce stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "This is impossible. I have deeds, permits, based on falsified documents and bribes." Dominic stood, positioning himself between Pierce and Tommy. "My father purchased that land 30 years ago. It's been in a family trust ever since, with instructions for transfer to Tommy on his 9th birthday. Your purchase was from a shell company that never actually owned the property. Your real dad couldn't even afford a present like this, Pierce snarled, gesturing to the expensive drone sitting among Tommy's gifts, the one he'd brought despite not being invited. Tommy looked at Dominic with momentary confusion. Then understanding dawned in his young eyes as he realized Pierce had tried to suggest Dominic wasn't his biological father. Olivia gasped. Alistair, how could you say that to a child? But the damage was calculated. In that brief moment of doubt, as Tommy glanced between Dominic and Pierce, the final piece of Dominic's plan fell into place. My real dad, Tommy said slowly, looking up at Dominic, is the one who's always been there, who takes me fishing and helps with my homework. Dominic squeezed Tommy's shoulder, then addressed Pierce with deadly calm. Security will show you out now. If you ever speak to my son again, the consequences will make what you've experienced so far seem like a gentle warning. As security escorted a protesting Pierce from the property, Dominic turned to the silent, shocked guests. Everyone, please enjoy the party. Tommy has a cake to cut, and I believe there are still presents to open. Gradually, the festive atmosphere returned. Tommy, resilient as children often are, was soon excitedly explaining to his friends that he owned an entire lake. Olivia remained, shell-shocked and silent, watching from the periphery as her son celebrated without needing her. Later, as guests began to leave, Olivia approached Dominic. Was this your plan all along? To use Tommy's birthday to deliver the final blow. Tommy's birthday was always going to be special, Dominic replied. The timing of everything else was fortuitous. And now what? You've destroyed Alistair. You've ruined my career and reputation. You've taken my son. Is your revenge complete? Dominic regarded her thoughtfully. It was never about revenge, Olivia. It was about consequences, about ensuring that people understand that every action has a response. He gestured toward Tommy, laughing with his remaining friends, and about making sure that my son knows his father will move heaven and earth to protect him, even from his own mother's poor choices. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to hurt Tommy, but you did. When you used him as cover for your affair, when you chose Pierce over his stability and happiness. Dominic's voice remained even, without heat. Your supervised visitation begins next Wednesday. 3 hours, with the court-appointed supervisor present. I suggest you use that time to begin rebuilding whatever relationship you can with our son. As Olivia turned to leave, Dominic added, Oh, and Olivia? The lake house where you and Pierce used to meet when you claimed to be at design conferences? It's part of Tommy's trust now, too. I've arranged for it to be donated to a children's camp for underprivileged youth. Seems fitting, don't you think? Her face crumpled as she walked away, the full weight of everything she had lost finally sinking in. That night, after Tommy was in bed, Dominic sat alone on the deck of their home, nursing a whiskey and watching the stars. Howard joined him, taking the adjacent chair. Hell of a party, Howard commented. Tommy enjoyed it. The boy seemed happy, yes. Howard studied his friend's profile. And you? Did you get what you wanted? Dominic considered the question. Justice was served. The guilty were punished. Tommy's future is secure. That's not what I asked. Dominic turned to face his oldest friend. What I wanted was for them to understand exactly who they chose to betray. For them to recognize that actions have consequences. And yes, Howard, I got precisely what I wanted. Howard nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I think Tommy is lucky to have you as his father. A rare, genuine smile crossed Dominic's face. That, my friend, is worth everything. As Howard left, Dominic remained on the deck, contemplating the stars. The foundation of his life had been shaken, but not destroyed. He had rebuilt something stronger, more honest, and ultimately more enduring. Tommy would grow up knowing his father's true nature, not just the builder of houses, but the protector of what mattered most. And anyone who ever considered crossing Dominic Hawthorne in the future would remember the fate of those who had tried before. Chapter 7. Aftermath. 6 months after Tommy's birthday party, Dominic stood at the edge of Hawthorne Lake, watching his son skip stones across the placid surface. The lake house, now fully renovated, had become their primary residence. The city house sold to create distance from painful memories. 7 skips. Tommy shouted triumphantly. Did you see that, Dad? I did. You're getting better every day. Tommy beamed. Then his expression grew more serious. Mom's coming tomorrow, right? Yes, for your school play. Front row, as promised. The court-mandated psychiatric evaluation had eventually granted Olivia unsupervised visitation rights, though Dominic retained primary custody. In the months since the birthday party, she had slowly begun rebuilding her relationship with Tommy, careful to keep their interactions positive and free from the tensions between her and Dominic. Is she bringing her new friend? Tommy asked cautiously. Olivia had recently begun dating a teacher from Tommy's school, a relationship Dominic had thoroughly investigated before deciding the man posed no threat to his son. I believe so. Is that okay with you? Tommy shrugged. He's nice. He helps me with math sometimes. Dominic nodded, filing away the information. Good. Math is important. As they headed back to the house for dinner, Dominic's phone rang. Russell. I'll be right in, buddy. Start washing up, he told Tommy before answering. Russell, what's the update? Pierce's appeal was denied. The property remains in Tommy's trust, and the development project is officially dead. And the criminal charges? He took the plea deal. 18 months in a minimum security facility, 5 years probation, and restitution payments to the affected homebuyers. What about Floyd? Probation only in exchange for his testimony. He's moved to Arizona, trying to start over. Dominic absorbed this information with quiet satisfaction. And the deputy mayor? Nelson resigned last week as part of his own plea agreement. The FBI investigation is expanding to other developments and officials. Perfect. Dominic gazed out at the lake. And the community center construction? On schedule. The Hawthorne Foundation's first major project will open next spring. After Tommy's birthday revelation, Dominic had established the Hawthorne Foundation, dedicated to building safe, affordable housing and community spaces. The first project, intentionally located adjacent to what would have been Pierce's luxury development, was a community center providing after-school programs, job training, and resources for families in need. Any word from Olivia about the foundation board position? Dominic asked. Her attorney says she's considering it. It would be good optics for her rehabilitation in the community. Dominic had recently offered Olivia a non-voting advisory position on the foundation board, a calculated move that would show the community he was willing to co-parent civilly while keeping her firmly under his control. Keep me posted. And Russell, thank you for everything. That evening, after dinner and homework, Dominic sat in his office reviewing the latest foundation plans when Tommy appeared in the doorway. Dad, can I ask you something? Always, buddy. Tommy entered hesitantly, clutching a framed photo, the one of Dominic and Floyd that he'd found months ago. Why do you still have this picture if Mr. Callahan was a bad person? Dominic considered the question carefully. Floyd made bad choices that hurt our family. But before that, he helped me build something important. The picture reminds me to be careful who I trust. Mom says people can change, that everyone deserves forgiveness. Your mom has a perspective, and there's wisdom in forgiveness. Dominic set the photo aside, but there's also wisdom in remembering that actions have consequences. Tommy frowned, processing this. Is that why Mr. Pierce had to go to jail? Because of consequences? Exactly. Mr. Pierce broke the law. He cheated people. Those actions had consequences. But you didn't put him in jail. The police did. Dominic smiled slightly. The police enforced the law. I simply made sure the truth came to light. Tommy seemed satisfied with this explanation. I'm glad we live at the lake now. I like it better than our old house. Me too, buddy. After Tommy went to bed, Dominic poured himself a whiskey and opened his laptop. An email from Olivia awaited him. Dom, I've decided to accept the foundation board position. Not for you, but for Tommy. He deserves to see his parents working together on something positive. The past year has been a harsh lesson in consequences, as you would say. I've lost almost everything that once mattered to me. But I'm rebuilding, just as you've always been so good at doing. I'll never forgive you for the calculated way you dismantled my life. But I understand now what drove you to it. And perhaps, in some twisted way, I deserved it. See you at Tommy's play tomorrow. Olivia. Dominic read the email twice, then deleted it without responding. Forgiveness had never been part of his plan, nor had he sought her understanding. The consequences she had experienced were exactly what her actions warranted. No more, no less. His phone buzzed with a text from Howard. Dinner tomorrow after Tommy's play? We should discuss the Foundation's next project. Dominic replied affirmatively, then set his phone aside. Howard remained his closest friend, though their relationship had been strained by the events of the past year. Howard had questioned the extent of Dominic's retribution, concerned that the cold, calculating side of his friend had overtaken the man he once knew. But Dominic knew better. He wasn't changed. He was revealed. The mask of amiable builder and devoted family man had simply slipped to show the steel beneath. The unforgiving core that had always existed, waiting for a reason to emerge. The next day, Dominic sat in the school auditorium, watching Tommy perform in his class play. 3 rows behind him sat Floyd Callahan, now returned from Arizona for a brief visit. Dominic had spotted him entering, but gave no indication of recognition. In the row behind Dominic sat Olivia with her new boyfriend, maintaining a respectful distance. After the performance, as parents and children mingled in the lobby, Floyd approached cautiously. Dominic. Dominic turned, his expression neutral. Floyd, I didn't expect to see you here. My nephew is in Tommy's class. Floyd shifted uncomfortably. I wanted to say, don't. Dominic's voice was quiet but firm. Whatever amends you're hoping to make, save them. We're done. I know I can never fix what I did, but I want you to know I regret it. Every day. Regret is the luxury of those who've been caught, Floyd. It means nothing to me. Floyd nodded resignedly. I understand. For what it's worth, the Foundation's work, it's impressive. You've created something good from all this. I've always built things to last, Floyd. Even my retribution. Dominic gave a thin smile. Enjoy your visit. I suggest making it brief. As Floyd walked away, Olivia approached with Tommy. He was amazing, she said, smiling proudly at their son. He was, Dominic agreed. An awkward silence fell between them, broken by Tommy's drama teacher calling him over to take photos with his classmates. I've accepted the board position, Olivia said once Tommy was out of earshot. Russell informed me. I have some ideas for the Women's Resource Center. Design concepts that could. Submit them through the proper channels. The board will review them at the next meeting. Olivia sighed. Are we always going to be like this, Dom? Cold and formal. This is cordial co-parenting, Olivia. It's more than many in our situation manage. And more than I deserve, according to you. Dominic finally looked directly at her. What you deserve isn't relevant anymore. What matters is what Tommy deserves. 2 parents who can interact without hostility. That's what I'm providing. Before she could respond, Tommy ran back to them, excited about his performance. Dominic smoothly shifted into proud father mode, the momentary tension with Olivia invisible to their son. Later that evening, over dinner with Howard in an upscale restaurant overlooking Puget Sound, Dominic shared his plans for the Foundation's expansion. 3 new projects next year, he explained. The Women's Resource Center, a vocational training facility, and affordable housing near the university. Howard nodded approvingly. Ambitious, and funded entirely by the settlement from Pierce's company, primarily. Poetic justice. Howard studied his friend. You've channeled everything into this foundation. The revenge, the anger, even the proceeds from destroying your enemies. It's almost as if you're trying to balance some cosmic scale. There's nothing cosmic about it. Dominic sipped his wine. It's simple mathematics. They took from me, so I took from them. Now I'm building something better from the remains. And are you happy, Dom? Truly. The question caught Dominic off guard. Happiness had never been his metric for success. I have Tommy. I have purpose. The people who betrayed me have faced justice. That's not what I asked. Dominic considered the question more deeply. Happiness is for people who haven't seen behind the curtain. Howard, I've seen what people are capable of, the betrayals, the calculations, the selfishness. I don't expect happiness. I expect integrity in my dealings and consequences for those who lack it. That's a cold way to live. It's an honest way to live. Dominic raised his glass. To honesty, then. Howard reluctantly clinked glasses. To honesty, and maybe someday, to something warmer. Chapter 8. Reckonings. 1 year after Tommy's fateful birthday party, Dominic stood in the newly completed Hawthorne Community Center, surveying the space with satisfaction. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked what would have been Pierce's lakeside development, now a nature preserve established by Tommy's trust. "Mr. Hawthorne?" A young woman approached, clipboard in hand. "The reporters are ready for the press conference whenever you are." "Thank you, Jessica. 5 minutes." As the assistant walked away, Dominic felt a presence beside him. Howard had arrived, looking distinguished in a tailored suit. "Quite the achievement," Howard commented, gesturing to the bustling community center. "From blueprint to reality in record time. When you don't have to navigate bribery channels, construction moves efficiently." Dominic straightened his tie. "Is Tommy here?" "In the game room with the other kids. Olivia dropped him off. She's in the audience for your speech." Dominic nodded, unsurprised. Despite their history, Olivia had become an active contributor to the foundation, redesigning her career around community-focused architecture. Her expertise was valuable, and Dominic was pragmatic enough to utilize it, maintaining strict professional boundaries. "Any word from our recently released friend?" Howard asked carefully. Alastair Pierce had completed his prison sentence 2 months earlier, emerging from incarceration a shadow of his former self. His wealthy friends had abandoned him, his ex-wife had remarried, and his business empire had been divided among creditors and lawsuit settlements. "My sources say he's living in Portland, trying to rebuild with a small residential construction company." Dominic's expression remained neutral, operating under his mother's maiden name. "And that satisfies you? Knowing he's starting over from nothing?" "Justice isn't about satisfaction, Howard. It's about equilibrium." Pierce's actions damaged lives. His consequences reflect that damage. Before Howard could respond, Jessica returned to escort Dominic to the press conference. For the next hour, he spoke eloquently about the Foundation's mission, the community center's programs, and the upcoming projects. Reporters asked predictable questions about funding, staffing, and future plans, all of which Dominic handled with practiced ease. Until the final question. "Mr. Hawthorne," called a journalist from the back row, "your foundation rose from the ashes of the Meridian property scandal. Critics suggest the timing was opportunistic, that you leveraged Alastair Pierce's downfall for personal gain and public rehabilitation. How do you respond?" A tense silence fell over the room. Dominic located the speaker, a young reporter he didn't recognize. "An interesting perspective," Dominic replied calmly, "but factually incorrect. The Hawthorne Foundation was established using personal funds and legally obtained settlements. As for rehabilitation," he allowed himself a small smile, "I wasn't the one who needed rehabilitating." Scattered laughter broke the tension. The press conference concluded, and Dominic moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and discussing future partnerships. He spotted Olivia across the room, deep in conversation with the Foundation's education director. Their eyes met briefly. She gave a professional nod, which he returned. Later, as the crowd thinned, Jessica approached again. "Mr. Hawthorne, there's someone asking to speak with you privately. He says it's urgent." "Did he give a name?" "Benjamin Walsh. He says you knew his father." Dominic stilled. Senator Walsh, whose wife had served on charity boards with Pierce's ex-wife Gwen. The connection was distant, but significant. "Show him to my office." Minutes later, a young man in his early 30s entered Dominic's office. Tall and well-dressed, with a confident bearing of old money and political connections. "Mr. Hawthorne," he extended his hand, "thank you for seeing me." Dominic shook it firmly. "What can I do for Senator Walsh's son?" Benjamin smiled tightly. "Former senator. My father passed last year. My condolences." "Thank you." Benjamin settled into a chair. "I'll be direct, Mr. Hawthorne. I'm here about Alastair Pierce." Dominic's expression remained impassive. "Pierce is no longer my concern." "Perhaps not, but you're certainly his." Benjamin leaned forward. "He's obsessed with you, with what you did to him. He talks about nothing else. That sounds like a psychiatric issue, not a business one." It became my business when he approached my development firm with information he claims could be valuable to us. Information about you. Now Dominic was intrigued. What kind of information? He wouldn't say specifically, just that it involved something from your early days. Before Hawthorne Construction became successful, Benjamin studied Dominic's face. He seemed to think it would interest me given my family's history with certain properties in the region. Dominic considered this. There was only one connection between his early career and the Walsh family. A parcel of land that had been central to his first major project, a project that had launched Hawthorne Construction's reputation. Why come to me with this? Benjamin sat back. My father always said you were a man of integrity in a business often lacking it. I'm not interested in Pierce's vendetta, but I am interested in knowing if there's any legitimacy to his claims before I waste resources investigating. And what would you do with this information if it proved legitimate? That would depend on its nature. Benjamin's expression hardened slightly. My family protects its interests, Mr. Hawthorne, as I believe you protect yours. The implied threat was subtle but clear. Dominic made a quick calculation. Pierce is grasping at straws. Whatever he suggested about my early projects or their connection to your family's properties is desperation from a broken man. You seem very certain. I am. Dominic stood, signaling the end of the meeting. But I appreciate the professional courtesy of this conversation. Your father raised you well. Benjamin rose, extending his hand again. He did. He also taught me to verify, then trust. I'll be looking into Pierce's claims, Mr. Hawthorne. Not out of malice, but due diligence. You'll find nothing worth your time. For both our sakes, I hope you're right. After Benjamin left, Dominic immediately called Russell. I need a complete background check on Benjamin Walsh, and I need to know who Pierce has been meeting with since his release. Something concerning? Russell asked. Potentially. Pierce has apparently approached Walsh with claims about my early projects. Specifically, I believe, the Westridge development. Russell was silent for a moment. That could be problematic, only if there's evidence. And we both know there isn't. There's always evidence, Dom. Sometimes it's just buried deep enough that no one thinks to look for it. Dominic ended the call and stared out the window at the nature preserve that had once been Pierce's dream development. The man was more resourceful than he'd given him credit for. Approaching the Walsh family was strategic. They had the resources and potential motivation to cause problems if Pierce's information proved valuable. That evening, as Dominic drove Tommy home from the community center opening, his son was unusually quiet. Everything okay, buddy? He asked. Tommy fidgeted with his seatbelt. Mom said Mr. Pierce is out of jail now. Dominic kept his eyes on the road. That's right. He served his sentence. Is he going to come back? Try to hurt us? No, buddy. Mr. Pierce has no reason to come near us, and he knows better than to try. Tommy was silent for another moment. Dad, did you make Mr. Pierce go to jail? Dominic chose his words carefully. Mr. Pierce broke the law, Tommy. I made sure the truth about that was known to the right people. The law did the rest. But if you hadn't told, he might not have gone to jail. That's right. And that wouldn't have been justice. Tommy seemed to consider this. Mom says sometimes it's better to forgive people than to punish them. Your mom has her perspective. Dominic glanced at his son. What do you think? Tommy shrugged. I think it depends on what they did. And if they're really sorry. That's wise, buddy. Very wise. Later that night, after Tommy was asleep, Dominic received a text from an unknown number. You should have taken my offer at the birthday party. Now we'll see what the Walsh family thinks about the original Westridge surveys. Dominic stared at the message, then blocked the number. Pierce was becoming a nuisance again, and nuisances in Dominic's world were eliminated, not tolerated. The next morning, Dominic met with Russell in his office at the foundation. What did you find on Benjamin Walsh? Russell placed a folder on the desk. Harvard Business School. Took over Walsh Development after his father's death. Clean record, respected in the industry. Recently engaged to Congressman Taylor's daughter. And his connection to Pierce? That's where it gets interesting. Russell opened the folder to reveal photographs. Pierce approached him 3 times in the past month. The final meeting included this woman. Dominic examined the photo of an elderly woman with a cane. Who is she? Margaret Westridge. Dominic's expression darkened. The original property owner. Exactly. Her family sold the Westridge tract to your company in 2010, your first major development. That sale was completely legitimate. All paperwork was in order. Yes, but according to my sources, Pierce has been suggesting otherwise. He's apparently told Walsh and Ms. Westridge that there were irregularities in the environmental impact studies, specifically regarding the wetland designation. The Westridge property had contained a small wetland area that had been reclassified prior to development, a completely legal process, though one that had involved substantial paperwork and several meetings with planning officials. Those studies were conducted by certified professionals and approved by regulatory authorities, Dominic said firmly. Yes, but one of those professionals was Floyd Callahan's cousin, and one of those regulatory officials later worked for you as a consultant. Pierce is suggesting collusion. Dominic absorbed this information quietly. What's Walsh's interest? His company owns adjacent property. If the Westridge environmental studies were fraudulent, it could affect his development plans. And the Westridge family might have grounds for a lawsuit claiming they sold under false pretenses. The statute of limitations has long passed. For criminal charges, yes. For civil action, it's more complicated, especially if they claim the information was deliberately concealed. Dominic stood and walked to the window. What does Pierce hope to gain from this? Revenge. Partially, but also legitimacy. If he can prove you engage in similar practices to what he was convicted for, it validates his claim that he was singled out unfairly. How much do they know? According to my source, Pierce claims to have copies of original surveys that contradict the final environmental impact statement. But he hasn't produced them yet. Because they don't exist, Dominic said firmly. The surveys were conducted properly. Russell was silent for a moment. Dom, were they? Dominic turned to face his longtime attorney and friend. Are you asking me if I falsified environmental studies, Russell? After all these years, I'm asking if there's anything I need to know to protect you and the Foundation. The only thing you need to know is that Pierce is desperate and dangerous. He'll manufacture evidence if he has to. Dominic returned to his desk. I want surveillance on him. I want to know everyone he meets with. And I want the complete original files on the Westridge development. Everything we have. After Russell left, Dominic sat alone, contemplating his next move. Pierce was attempting to undermine the foundation of Dominic's legitimacy, the very thing Dominic had used to destroy him. It was a calculated move, targeting the one project from Dominic's past that had potential vulnerabilities. The question wasn't whether Pierce could prove wrongdoing. Dominic was confident he couldn't. The question was whether the mere suggestion of impropriety, coming from someone with insider knowledge of the industry, could create enough doubt to damage the Foundation and Dominic's reputation. And that was a risk Dominic couldn't afford to take. Not when everything he'd built for Tommy's future depended on the integrity of the Hawthorne name. Chapter 9. Resolution. 3 days after Benjamin Walsh's visit, Dominic received an encrypted email from Russell containing scanned documents. The subject line read simply, "Found by my investigator in Pierce's apartment." Dominic opened the files to find what appeared to be original environmental surveys of the Westridge property, surveys that contradicted the official reports submitted for the development permits. The documents were dated from 2010 and contained handwritten notes in what looked like Floyd Callahan's handwriting, detailing how to revise the wetland boundaries. If authentic, these documents would support Pierce's allegations of fraud and potentially expose Dominic to civil liability. More importantly, they would undermine the Foundation's integrity and tarnish Tommy's inheritance. Dominic immediately called Russell. "These are forgeries. Are you certain? They look convincing. Floyd's handwriting is close but inconsistent. And the letterhead, look at the logo. We changed design firms in 2009. These used a newer logo on supposedly older documents." Good catch. Russell sounded relieved. But it means Pierce is actively fabricating evidence. How did your investigator obtain these? Paid a cleaning service employee for access. Completely off the books. Make copies, then have them returned exactly as found. Pierce mustn't know we're aware of his plan. The next day, Dominic received a formal letter from Benjamin Walsh requesting a meeting to discuss historical matters relating to the Westridge development. The letter mentioned that Margaret Westridge and her attorney would be present, along with other interested parties. Instead of responding directly, Dominic called Howard. "I need your help with something delicate." 2 hours later, Howard arrived at Dominic's office. After ensuring privacy, Dominic explained the situation. "Pierce is manufacturing evidence to suggest I fraudulently developed the Westridge property. He's convinced Benjamin Walsh and the original property owner to investigate." Howard frowned. "But the development was legitimate, right?" Dominic gave him a long look. "Of course it was. But perception matters as much as reality. If Pierce can create enough doubt, he could damage the foundation. What do you need from me? Margaret Westridge trusts you. Your firm handled her late husband's estate. I need you to meet with her privately before Walsh's planned confrontation." Howard hesitated. To do what exactly? To show her these. Dominic handed over a folder containing photographs and documents. "These are the original, authentic surveys of her property, along with records of the full payment her family received, considerably above market value at the time." Howard reviewed the materials. "And if she asks why I'm involved, tell her the truth. That you're concerned she's being used as a pawn in Pierce's vendetta against me. That her reputation could be damaged if she associates with his false claims." Do you think she'll listen? She's a practical woman from a business-minded family. Show her the financial records, especially the comparison showing how much more she received than similar properties sold that year. Howard nodded slowly. "And Walsh? I'll handle Walsh separately." After Howard left, Dominic made another call to Senator Walsh's widow, Elizabeth. They had served together on charity boards years ago, and while not close friends, they shared mutual respect. "Elizabeth, it's Dominic Hawthorne. I apologize for calling unexpectedly, but I'm concerned about a situation involving Benjamin." He explained that her son was being drawn into a potentially embarrassing situation by Alastair Pierce, a convicted felon with a personal vendetta. "Benjamin is a smart businessman," Elizabeth replied. "He wouldn't pursue this without reason. Pierce is presenting forged documents, Elizabeth, documents that appear to show irregularities in the Westridge development. But they're fabrications designed to damage my foundation and reputation. Have you spoken to Benjamin about this? I want to speak with you first, out of respect for your late husband. Senator Walsh and I didn't always agree on policy, but we respected each other's integrity." There was a pause before Elizabeth responded. "I'll speak with Benjamin. I can't promise he'll withdraw from this matter, but I'll ensure he understands the potential complications of associating with someone like Pierce. That's all I ask." "Thank you, Elizabeth." The following day, Dominic received a brief email from Benjamin Walsh. Meeting postponed indefinitely. Further review of preliminary evidence indicates insufficient basis for proceeding. Regards, B. Walsh. Howard called that evening. Margaret Westridge has withdrawn her participation in any investigation of the Westridge development. She was quite emphatic about not wanting to be involved in a feud between developers. Dominic allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. And Pierce, according to my sources, he's furious. Apparently showed up at Walsh's office demanding an explanation and was escorted out by security. Perfect. Dominic gazed out at the lake, watching Tommy skip stones in the fading light. One final piece to attend to. The next morning, Dominic visited the small office Pierce had established in Portland. The secretary, not recognizing him, asked if he had an appointment. "No, but Mr. Pierce will want to see me. Tell him Dominic Hawthorne is here." Moments later, a visibly agitated Pierce burst from his office. "You, how dare you show up here? Is there somewhere we can speak privately?" Dominic asked calmly. Pierce glared, then jerked his head toward his office. Once inside with the door closed, he turned on Dominic. "Here to gloat?" Walsh pulled out. "The Westridge woman won't return my calls. You've poisoned everyone against me. Again, I'm here to deliver a message, Alastair. One final message. I don't want to hear anything you have to say." Dominic placed a USB drive on the desk. "This contains footage from your recent meetings with Walsh and Margaret Westridge. It also contains clear images of the forged documents you created. Documents that constitute criminal fraud." Pierce paled. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Dominic sat down uninvited. "You're on probation, Alastair. Criminal fraud would send you back to prison, this time to a considerably less comfortable facility than your previous accommodation. What do you want? For you to disappear. Permanently. Not just from my life and Tommy's, but from this region entirely. Pierce laughed bitterly. You want me to just abandon everything and leave? Because you say so? No. Because it's your only viable option. Dominic leaned forward. The alternative is that I provide this evidence to your probation officer and the FBI. You return to prison. Upon release, you'll find that I've established a foundation grant specifically designed to fund legal representation for anyone who believes they were defrauded by your business practices. There are plenty of former clients who would jump at financial backing to pursue claims against you. You're insane. This isn't vendetta, Alistair. It's mathematics. You try to destroy what I built. You failed. Now you're trying again and failing again. The sensible choice is to acknowledge defeat and move on. Pierce stared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. You destroyed everything I had. My company, my marriage, my reputation. No, Dominic stood. You destroyed those things when you chose to cheat, lie, and manipulate. I merely ensured you face the consequences of those choices. He moved toward the door. You have 48 hours to make arrangements to leave. After that, the evidence goes to the authorities. And if I agree, you'll just let me walk away. As long as you never contact me, my family, or anyone connected to us again. As long as you establish your new life at least 500 miles from here. And as long as you understand that if you ever attempt to retaliate again, the consequences will make your previous experiences seem pleasant by comparison. Pierce slumped in his chair, the fight visibly draining from him. You really are a monster, Hawthorne. No, I'm just a man who protects what's his. Something you should have considered before targeting my family. Dominic opened the door. 48 hours, Alistair. Make them count. 3 days later, Russell confirmed that Pierce had sold his fledgling business and purchased a one-way ticket to Miami. The threat was neutralized, this time permanently. That weekend, Dominic and Tommy stood on the dock at Hawthorne Lake, fishing poles in hand. The morning sun glinted off the water, and birds called from the surrounding forest that Tommy's trust now protected in perpetuity. Dad, Tommy asked, reeling in his line. Are we going to the foundation opening next week? The one for the new housing project. Absolutely. It's an important day. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. Mom says you're helping a lot of people now. That the foundation is doing good things. That's the goal, buddy. To build something meaningful. Something that lasts. Is that why you were so angry when Mr. Pierce and Mom tried to hurt her business? Because you were building something important. Dominic looked down at his son, perceptive, intelligent, and mercifully innocent of the full scope of adult betrayals and retributions. Partly, but mostly because they betrayed trust. When people work together, they have to trust each other. Breaking that trust doesn't just hurt feelings. It damages everything connected to it. Like when Adam lied about breaking the window at school, and then everyone in class got in trouble. Something like that, yes. Tommy was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm glad the bad stuff is over. I like how things are now. Dominic put his arm around his son's shoulders. Me too, buddy. As they stood together on the dock, Dominic surveyed the kingdom he had defended and expanded. Not just the physical properties and business holdings, but the legacy he was creating for Tommy. A legacy built on the understanding that actions have consequences, that betrayal comes with a cost, and that real power lies not in forgiveness, but in the ability to deliver justice on your own terms. The foundation he had established would do good work, helping communities and creating opportunities. But its true purpose, like everything Dominic had built since Olivia's betrayal, was to ensure that Tommy inherited a world where the Hawthorne name commanded respect and even fear, where no one would dare cross him as they had his father. Olivia had rebuilt a cordial relationship with Tommy and found a new path forward professionally. Floyd had retreated to obscurity, his reputation permanently stained. Pierce had been systematically destroyed, then exiled when he attempted to retaliate. And Dominic? He had emerged stronger, his true nature revealed but unchallenged. The ruthless calculator beneath the builder's exterior now acknowledged, and even respected by those who had previously underestimated him. "I think I got a bite," Tommy exclaimed, his fishing rod bending. "Steady," Dominic advised, watching his son battle with the fish. "Take your time. Remember what I taught you." As Tommy successfully landed the large trout, his face glowing with pride, Dominic felt a rare moment of genuine contentment. Not happiness. That was, as he told Howard, for people who hadn't seen behind the curtain, but satisfaction in knowing that every foundation he'd laid, both literal and metaphorical, had been built to withstand any storm. And anyone who ever considered crossing Dominic Hawthorne in the future would remember the fate of those who had tried before. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Call. Craig Stevens had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years as a criminal investigator with the State Bureau of Investigation had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. Even now, 5 years into his private security consulting business, he could spot deception from across a crowded room. But nothing had prepared him for the terror in his 8-year-old daughter's voice that Tuesday evening. He was reviewing case files in his home office when his cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's number, the emergency phone they'd given her for situations exactly like sleepovers at Aunt Cassie's house. "Hey, sweetheart," Craig answered warmly. "Having fun with Aunt Cassie and Uncle Dan. Daddy, help. Come get me now." Emma's voice was strangled with panic, barely above a whisper. Craig's blood turned to ice. His daughter had never sounded like this, not even during her worst nightmares. "Emma, what's wrong? Calm down and tell Daddy what's happening. Auntie and Uncle are doing things to me that I can't say." The words came out in a terrified rush. "Please, Daddy, I'm scared." The line went dead. Craig stared at the phone for exactly 2 seconds before his training kicked in. He was already moving toward the stairs, shouting for his wife. "Christina, we need to go. Now." Christina Stevens appeared at the top of the stairs, her auburn hair still damp from the shower. One look at her husband's face told her everything she needed to know. In their 15 years of marriage, she'd seen Craig handle armed suspects, death threats, and corrupt politicians with unwavering composure. She'd never seen him look like this. "Emma," she whispered. "Get in the car," Craig said, his voice deadly calm. "I'll explain on the way." As Christina threw on clothes, Craig's mind raced through possibilities. Dan Woodard had married Christina's younger sister, Cassie, 3 years ago. Craig had never liked the man. There was something off about his too-perfect smile and the way his eyes never quite met yours when he spoke. But Cassie was head over heels, and Christina had begged Craig to give her new brother-in-law a chance. Craig grabbed his service weapon from the gun safe, checked the magazine, and secured it in his shoulder holster. Old habits died hard, and right now, he was grateful for every single one of them. The drive to Cassie's house normally took 40 minutes. Craig made it in 25, running red lights, and pushing his BMW to its limits while Christina called Emma's number repeatedly. Each ring that went unanswered felt like a knife twisting in his chest. "Tell me exactly what she said," Christina demanded, her voice shaking. Craig recounted the conversation word for word, his investigator's memory serving him perfectly. Christina's face grew paler with each detail. "Dan's been so good with Emma," she whispered. "He always volunteers to babysit, takes her to the park." "Oh God, Craig, what if—" "Don't," Craig cut her off. "We don't know anything yet, but we're going to find out." They pulled into the driveway of the modest 2-story house at 9:47 p.m. Every light was on, which struck Craig as odd. He'd expected them to be asleep by now, or at least settling down for the night. Craig approached the front door with Christina close behind. Before he could knock, Cassie opened it, her face flushed and her smile too bright. "Craig, Christina, what a surprise. What brings you by so late?" "We're here for Emma," Craig said, his eyes scanning past Cassie into the house. "She called us." "Oh," She must have been having a nightmare, Cassie said quickly. You know how kids are with sleepovers. She's fine now, though. Already back asleep. Everything about Cassie's demeanor screamed deception. Her hands were shaking, her pupils dilated, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if waiting for someone to appear. I'd like to see her, Craig said. It wasn't a request. Well, she's sleeping, and you know how cranky she gets when she's woken up. Cassie, Christina stepped forward. Where's my daughter? Before Cassie could answer, Dan appeared behind her. Craig's trained eye immediately cataloged the man's appearance. Disheveled clothing, flushed face, and a thin sheen of sweat despite the cool evening air. Hey there, folks, Dan said with his trademark grin. Emma's having such a good time. Hate to cut the sleepover short. She called us, Craig said, his voice level. She was scared. Kids and their imaginations, right? Dan chuckled, but Craig caught the slight tremor in his voice. She probably had a bad dream and got confused. You know how it is. Craig stepped closer, using his 6'2" frame to full advantage. Dan was shorter, softer, the kind of man who'd never been in a real fight. I'd like to speak with my daughter. Now, the tension in the air was palpable. Christina moved to support her husband, while Cassie seemed to shrink into herself. Of course, Dan said finally. She's upstairs. I'll get her. We'll come with you, Craig said. As they climbed the stairs, Craig's mind was working overtime. Dan's body language, Cassie's nervous energy, the way they both kept glancing at each other. Everything pointed to a situation spiraling out of control, and Emma was at the center of it. They found Emma in the guest room, sitting on the bed in her pajamas. The moment she saw her parents, she launched herself into Craig's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Daddy, I want to go home. Please take me home. Craig held his daughter close, feeling her small body trembling against his chest. Over her head, he met Dan's eyes and saw something that made his blood run cold. Not embarrassment or confusion, but calculation. Dan was already working out his next move. Thank you for having her, Christina said coldly, gathering Emma's things. We'll be going now. As they prepared to leave, Craig lingered in the doorway, studying Dan's face. 20 years of interrogation experience had taught him to read micro-expressions, and what he saw confirmed his worst fears. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Craig, Dan called as they headed for the car. I hope there's no misunderstanding here. Emma's always welcome in our home. Craig turned back slowly. There's no misunderstanding, Dan. None at all. The drive home was tense. Emma fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted from her ordeal, while Christina peppered Craig with whispered questions he couldn't yet answer. Back home, they tucked Emma into her own bed, and Craig waited until he was sure she was asleep before joining Christina in their bedroom. What do we do now? Christina asked. Craig was already reaching for his laptop. Now we find out exactly who Dan Woodard really is. Chapter 2, Revelations. Craig spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough background investigation of his career. What he discovered made his stomach turn and his hands clench into fists. Daniel Marcus Woodard, age 34, had a carefully constructed identity that fell apart under serious scrutiny. His employment history showed gaps that didn't add up, references that led to disconnected phone numbers, and educational credentials that couldn't be verified. More disturbing were the patterns Craig uncovered. Over the past decade, Dan had lived in 4 different states, always leaving abruptly after 18 to 24 months. In each location, there had been whispered allegations involving children. Nothing that stuck, nothing officially reported, but consistent enough to form a clear picture. Craig's contacts in law enforcement were invaluable. Detective Warren Young from the Riverside Police Department owed Craig a favor from his bureau days, and he wasn't shy about sharing what he knew. Your brother-in-law's name has come up in our files twice in the past year, Warren told Craig over coffee at a diner downtown. Both times involving inappropriate contact with minors at the community center where he volunteers. Why wasn't he arrested? Craig demanded. Warren's expression darkened. Because both times, the family suddenly decided not to press charges. Both times, they received anonymous donations to their children's college funds. Both times, they moved out of state within 6 months. The pieces were falling into place, and Craig didn't like the picture they were forming. Dan wasn't just a predator. He was a sophisticated one with resources and connections. There's something else, Warren continued. Dan's got friends in high places. Judge Patrick Nelson plays poker with him twice a month. District Attorney Ernest Chung's wife works at the charity where Dan volunteers. This guy's been building a network of protection. Craig's phone buzzed with a text from Christina. Emma's therapist wants to see us both. Today, 4 p.m. Dr. Agnes Koch was a child psychologist with 30 years of experience. Her office was warm and inviting, but her expression was grim as she met with Craig and Christina. I've had 2 sessions with Emma, she began. She's exhibiting classic signs of sexual trauma. Nightmares, regression in behavior, fear of being alone with adult men, and most telling, age-inappropriate knowledge about sexual acts. Christina's face went white. Craig felt his world tilt on its axis. Emma described specific incidents. Dr. Koch continued gently. She's consistent in her details, and her emotional responses are genuine. In my professional opinion, she was sexually abused during her stay at your sister's house. The words hit Craig like physical blows. His 8-year-old daughter, his baby girl, had been violated by a man he'd allowed into their lives. What's our next step? Craig asked, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. Report it to the authorities, Dr. Koch said. I'm mandated to do so regardless, but having parental support makes the process easier for Emma. That evening, Craig and Christina met with Detective Marty Jones from the Special Victims Unit. Jones was thorough and compassionate, but Craig could see the writing on the wall before they'd even finished giving their statement. Mr. Stevens, Jones said carefully, I want you to know we take these allegations very seriously. But I have to be honest with you about the challenges we're facing, such as Emma's age makes her testimony complicated. Defense attorneys will claim she was coached or confused. We have no physical evidence, and the only witnesses are Dan and Cassie, who will obviously deny everything. Craig's jaw tightened. So what are you telling me? I'm telling you that even if we arrest Dan Woodard, and that's a big if, there's a good chance he'll walk. And given his connections in this town, there's an even better chance this case gets buried before it reaches trial. That night, Craig couldn't sleep. He stood in Emma's doorway, watching his daughter toss and turn, calling out for him in her dreams. The system that had been his life's work was failing his family when they needed it most. He made a decision that would change everything. Craig returned to his office and began making phone calls. His network of contacts extended far beyond local law enforcement. He called in favors, shared information, and slowly began assembling a picture of Dan Woodard's true identity and network of protection. Joseph Burton, a federal investigator Craig had worked with years ago, provided the breakthrough. Your guy isn't working alone, Burton told him during a secure video call. We've been tracking a network of wealthy individuals involved in child exploitation. They provide financial support and legal protection in exchange for services. Dan Woodard's name appears in encrypted communications we intercepted 6 months ago. Craig felt his blood run cold. How many others? At least a dozen in your state alone. Judges, politicians, business leaders. They've been operating with impunity for years because they protect each other. The conversation continued for another hour, with Burton sharing details that made Craig's stomach churn. Emma wasn't Dan's first victim. She was part of a much larger pattern of abuse and exploitation. When Craig finally hung up, he sat in silence for a long time. The system wouldn't give his family justice. The law couldn't touch these people. But Craig wasn't bound by the same rules anymore. He opened his laptop and began typing. If the authorities wouldn't stop Dan Woodard and his network, Craig would do it himself. And he knew exactly where to start. Chapter 3. The System Fails. 2 weeks later, Craig's worst fears were confirmed. Despite Dr. Koch's testimony and Emma's brave statements to Detective Jones, the district attorney's office declined to press charges against Dan Woodard. Craig sat across from Assistant District Attorney Felipe Gibbons, struggling to maintain his composure as the man delivered what amounted to a death sentence for justice. The evidence is circumstantial, Gibbons said with practiced indifference. A child's testimony, no physical evidence, no corroborating witnesses. Any competent defense attorney would tear our case apart. My daughter was raped, Craig said through gritted teeth. She's 8 years old. She's in therapy because of what that animal did to her. I understand your frustration, Mr. Stevens, but I have to consider what I can prove in court, not just what I believe happened. Craig leaned forward. What if I told you Dan Woodard is part of a larger network? That there are other victims, other families who've been silenced? Gibbons's expression didn't change. Do you have evidence of this network? Names, documentation, financial records? Craig had plenty of evidence, thanks to Joseph Burton's investigation. But sharing it would compromise an ongoing federal operation and potentially destroy any chance of bringing down the entire network. I have credible intelligence. Intelligence isn't evidence, Mr. Stevens. Bring me something I can use in court and we'll talk. Walking out of the DA's office, Craig felt 20 years of faith in the justice system crumble around him. He dedicated his career to the belief that good ultimately triumphed over evil, that the system, however flawed, would protect the innocent. He'd been naive. That afternoon brought another devastating blow. Christina met him at home with tears in her eyes and legal papers in her hands. Cassie filed for a restraining order, she said, against both of us. She's claiming we're harassing her and Dan, that we're making false accusations to break up their marriage. Craig scanned the documents. Judge Patrick Nelson, Dan's poker buddy, had signed the order. It prohibited Craig and Christina from contacting Dan or Cassie, coming within 500 feet of their home, or discussing the allegations with anyone in their social circle. They're isolating us, Craig realized, making us look like the unstable ones. The phone rang. It was Dr. Koch. I wanted to let you know that I received a call from the state licensing board, she said carefully. Someone filed a complaint about my treatment of Emma, claiming I coerced her testimony. I'm under investigation. Craig closed his eyes. The network was moving fast, using their influence to neutralize anyone who might support Emma's case. Doctor, I want you to know. Mr. Stevens, she interrupted gently. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know what I saw, and I know what Emma told me. No investigation is going to change that, but I wanted you to understand what you're up against. After hanging up, Craig looked at his wife and daughter. Emma was coloring at the kitchen table, but she flinched every time a car drove past their house. Christina's eyes were red from crying, and she'd lost weight from the stress. They were all victims now. Craig made his decision that night. He called Warren Young and arranged a meeting at a secluded location outside town. I need your help, Craig told his old friend as they sat in Young's patrol car overlooking the river. Not as a cop, as a friend. Warren studied Craig's face in the dim light. What are you thinking? I'm thinking the system has failed my family. I'm thinking Dan Woodard and his friends believe they're untouchable. And I'm thinking it's time someone proved them wrong. Craig, you're talking about vigilante justice. That's not you. The man who believed in the system isn't me anymore, Craig replied. He died the day I realized his daughter's rapist would never see the inside of a courtroom. Warren was quiet for a long moment. What do you need? Over the next hour, Craig outlined his plan. It was audacious, dangerous, and completely illegal. It would require Warren to risk his career and Craig to abandon everything he'd once stood for. This could destroy us both, Warren warned. Dan Woodard destroyed my family, Craig said. I'm just returning the favor. The next morning, Craig began laying the groundwork for Dan's destruction. He started by visiting Tyrone Clayton, a private investigator who specialized in divorce cases and had a reputation for bending rules when the situation warranted it. I need everything on Dan Woodard, Craig told him. His real history, his financial records, his connections, his weaknesses. Everything. Clayton studied the photos and documents Craig provided. This is going to be expensive and dangerous. Men with this kind of protection don't go down easy. Money's no object, Craig said. And as for danger, I'm counting on it. While Clayton began his investigation, Craig reached out to another old contact, Emmanuel Christian, a computer specialist who'd left the Bureau under less than ideal circumstances but retained his skills and his resentment toward authority. I need digital surveillance, Craig explained during their meeting in a crowded mall food court. Phone records, email accounts, banking information. Can you do it without leaving traces? Emmanuel's smile was predatory. For the right price, I can make it look like Dan Woodard is investigating himself. Craig's final recruitment was the most important. Alfred Moore had been his partner during his last 3 years with the Bureau, before taking early retirement after a corruption scandal that had never quite been resolved. Alfred had always operated in gray areas, and Craig suspected he'd be amenable to a project that existed outside the boundaries of law. They met at Alfred's cabin in the mountains, 30 miles from the nearest neighbor. "You want to destroy a pedophile ring," Alfred said after Craig laid out everything he knew. "Can't say I'm opposed to the concept. It's not just about justice," Craig admitted. "It's about revenge. I want Dan Woodard to suffer the way my daughter has suffered. I wanted to know what it feels like to be helpless and afraid." Alfred poured himself another whiskey and considered. "You know this makes us criminals. The law didn't protect Emma. Maybe criminals can." Alfred raised his glass. "To crimes of conscience." By the end of the week, Craig had assembled his team and begun the preliminary phases of his plan. Dan Woodard thought he was untouchable, protected by his network of powerful friends. He was about to learn how wrong he was. Chapter 4: Building the Case. 6 weeks after Emma's assault, Craig's underground investigation had transformed him into someone even he didn't recognize. The methodical, by-the-book investigator had been replaced by a man driven by a single purpose: Dan Woodard's complete destruction. Tyrone Clayton's research had uncovered disturbing patterns spanning 2 decades. Dan's real name was Daniel Marcus Slaughter, and he'd been using variations of his identity to evade detection across multiple states. "Your boy's got a system," Clayton reported during their weekly meeting at an abandoned warehouse Craig had rented for operational security. "He targets families with young children, insinuates himself into their communities, grooms his victims for months before making his move." The files Clayton spread across the makeshift conference table painted a horrifying picture. Police reports that had been buried, families who'd been threatened into silence, and a paper trail of financial payoffs that led back to a network of wealthy individuals. "How many victims?" Craig asked, though he dreaded the answer. "That I can prove? 14 children over the past 8 years. But I suspect there are more. Many more." Emmanuel Christian's digital surveillance had been equally productive. From his mobile command center, a modified van filled with state-of-the-art hacking equipment, he'd penetrated Dan's electronic communications and discovered a treasure trove of incriminating evidence. "He's sloppy with his digital security," Emmanuel explained, showing Craig encrypted chat logs on his laptop screen. "Uses the same password for everything, clicks on phishing emails, never updates his software. For a criminal, he's remarkably stupid about technology." The chat logs revealed Dan's connections to his network of protectors. Judge Patrick Nelson provided legal immunity in exchange for access to Dan's victims. District Attorney Ernest Chung buried investigations that got too close to the truth. Business leader Gilberto McGee provided financial resources and safe houses. Most disturbing were the videos. Dan had been documenting his crimes, creating a personal collection that he shared with his network of fellow predators. "Can we use this as evidence?" Craig asked. Emmanuel shook his head. "Not legally. I obtained it through illegal surveillance. But we can use it other ways." Alfred Moore's contribution was more psychological than technical. His years of experience with criminal psychology had helped Craig understand exactly what motivated Dan and his associates. "These people believe they're untouchable because they've never faced real consequences," Alfred explained. "They've insulated themselves from justice through wealth and connections, but that same insulation makes them vulnerable in other ways." Alfred had been developing profiles of each network member, identifying their individual weaknesses and pressure points. "Nelson's got a gambling problem that his wife doesn't know about. Chung's having an affair with his secretary. McGee's been embezzling from his children's charity. They're all keeping secrets that could destroy them if revealed." Craig studied the profiles, his mind working through possibilities. "So we turn them against each other." "Exactly. Right now, they're unified by mutual self-interest. But if we can make each one believe the others are going to betray them." The strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attacking the network head-on, they would create paranoia and suspicion within the group, causing it to collapse from the inside. Craig's phone buzzed with a text from Warren Young. Meeting tonight. Usual place. Important. They met at the river overlook where they'd first discussed Craig's plan. Warren looked troubled, his usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. We've got a problem, Warren said without preamble. Dan knows you're investigating him. Craig's blood ran cold. Ow! Sources I can't reveal. But he's been asking questions, making phone calls. He knows you've been digging into his past. This changed everything. If Dan was aware of Craig's investigation, it meant the network was preparing countermeasures. What kind of questions? About your background, your contacts, your family's daily routines. Craig, I think he's planning something. The implication hit Craig like a physical blow. Dan wasn't content to hide behind his network of protection anymore. He was going on the offensive. Craig drove home that night with his mind racing. As he pulled into his driveway, he noticed a strange car parked across the street. It could be nothing, a neighbor's visitor, someone lost, and checking their phone. But Craig's instincts were screaming danger. He entered the house to find Christina and Emma in the living room, watching a movie. Everything seemed normal, but Craig couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. How was your day? Christina asked. Fine, Craig lied. How's Emma doing? Their daughter had been making progress in her new therapy sessions with a doctor from the next county, someone outside Dan's sphere of influence. She was sleeping better and had started drawing pictures that didn't feature monsters or darkness. But if Dan was escalating his efforts, Emma's progress could be threatened. Craig's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Stevens, a familiar voice said when he answered. It was Dan. I think we need to talk. Craig stepped into his home office and closed the door. I have nothing to say to you. Oh, I think you do. You see, I know you've been digging into my private life, making accusations, trying to turn people against me. That's harassment, Mr. Stevens. And harassment is illegal. So, is child rape. Dan's laugh was cold. Prove it. Oh wait, you can't. Because it didn't happen. But what has happened is that you've become obsessed with destroying an innocent man's reputation. That's defamation, Mr. Stevens. And I have very good lawyers. Craig kept his voice steady. What do you want? I want you to stop. Stop investigating me. Stop spreading lies. Stop trying to poison people's minds against me. In return, I won't file criminal charges against you for harassment and stalking. And if I don't stop, then we'll see how much you really care about your family's safety. The line went dead. Craig stared at the phone, Dan's threat echoing in his mind. The man who'd raped his daughter was now threatening his family's physical safety, and Craig knew from his research that Dan had the resources and connections to make good on that threat. But instead of fear, Craig felt something else, a cold, calculating rage that settled into his bones like ice. Dan had just made his biggest mistake. He'd revealed his hand too early and given Craig the justification he needed to escalate his own plans. Craig opened his laptop and began typing a message to his team. Game has changed. Target is now actively hostile. Moving to Phase 2 immediately. All constraints are off. Dan Woodard wanted to play hardball. Craig would show him what hardball really looked like. Chapter 5, The Trap Springs. The threatening phone call from Dan had accelerated Craig's timeline, but it also provided unexpected opportunities. If Dan was willing to make direct threats, he was getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. Craig's team moved into high gear. Emmanuel Christian deployed additional surveillance equipment around Dan's house and office, while Tyrone Clayton began following Dan's associates to establish their daily patterns. Alfred Moore focused on psychological warfare, developing strategies to increase paranoia within the network. But Craig's masterstroke came from an unexpected source, Dan himself. He's planning something big, Emmanuel reported during an emergency meeting at the warehouse. I intercepted communications about a gathering next weekend. All the major players will be there. Craig studied the intercepted messages on Emmanuel's laptop. Dan was organizing what appeared to be a social event at Judge Nelson's private estate, a party that would bring together every member of the network in one location. It's perfect, Alfred realized. They'll all be together, relaxed, off guard. If we're going to expose them, this is our chance. Craig was already forming a plan. How's the security at Nelson's estate? Tyrone consulted his reconnaissance files. Minimal. He relies on isolation rather than protection. The property's 30 acres, gated but not heavily monitored. Rich man's arrogance. What about communications? Emmanuel smiled. I can control everything electronic within a 5-mile radius. Phone signals, internet, even their cars' GPS systems. They'll be completely cut off. The plan Craig outlined was audacious and dangerous. They would infiltrate the gathering, document everything happening there, and simultaneously feed information to law enforcement agencies outside the local network's influence. But Craig had a personal agenda that went beyond mere exposure. I want Dan Woodard to know what it feels like to be helpless, he told his team. I want him to experience the terror my daughter felt. The night of the party, Craig's team took their positions around Nelson's estate. Emmanuel's mobile command center was hidden in the woods, his equipment scanning all electronic communications. Tyrone had established observation posts at key points around the property. Alfred remained at the warehouse, coordinating with federal contacts who were standing by to act on whatever evidence they gathered. Craig himself would be going inside. Using Tyrone's surveillance data, Craig had identified a gap in the property's security. A service entrance used by catering staff provided access without triggering the main gate sensors. Craig had acquired a catering uniform and fake credentials that would let him move freely around the estate. The party was already in full swing when Craig arrived. The gathering appeared to be a typical social event for wealthy professionals. Expensive suits, champagne, classical music. But Craig's trained eye noticed the subtle signs that marked it as something far more sinister. There were no women present except for servers, and those servers were all young, vulnerable-looking girls who kept their eyes downcast and moved with the careful precision of people who'd been thoroughly intimidated. Craig recognized several faces from his investigation files. Judge Nelson held court near the bar, regaling listeners with stories that made them laugh too loudly. District Attorney Chung was deep in conversation with a man Craig identified as Mayor Bob Hurst, another network member they hadn't known about. And there was Dan Woodard, looking completely at ease as he chatted with men who shared his twisted appetites. Craig activated the recording equipment hidden in his catering jacket and began moving through the room, documenting faces and conversations. The casual way these men discussed their crimes was sickening. Children referred to as merchandise, families described as obstacles to be managed. But the real horror began when the party moved to Nelson's private screening room. Craig positioned himself outside the room's service entrance, his recording equipment capturing everything as the network members settled in to watch videos of their crimes. Dan's voice was clearly audible as he narrated his assault on Emma, describing her fear and pain with enthusiastic detail. Craig's hands shook with rage as he listened to these monsters discussing his daughter like she was an object for their entertainment. But he forced himself to remain calm, to gather evidence, to build the case that would destroy them all. Then something went wrong. A hand clamped down on Craig's shoulder, and he found himself face to face with Andrew Poole, a massive man he recognized from Tyrone's surveillance photos as Nelson's head of security. Lost are we? Poole's voice was deadly quiet. Craig's cover story died in his throat as Poole's grip tightened on his shoulder. The man was armed, professionally trained, and suspicious of Craig's presence in an area meant only for trusted staff. Mr. Stevens, Dan Woodard's voice came from behind him. Craig turned to see Dan standing in the screening room doorway, his trademark smile replaced by something cold and predatory. How wonderful that you could join us, though I don't recall sending you an invitation. The other network members emerged from the screening room, surrounding Craig with the casual confidence of men accustomed to being untouchable. You've been a very busy man, Judge Nelson said, his judicial robes replaced by expensive casual wear, but his authority intact. Harassment, stalking, illegal surveillance. Quite a list of charges we could file. District Attorney Chung nodded. Unfortunately, Mr. Stevens, you've trespassed on private property while conducting illegal surveillance. That makes you a criminal. Craig remained silent, his mind working through options. His team was in position. His equipment was still recording, and Emmanuel would be monitoring all communications. But he was outnumbered and outgunned, surrounded by men who'd proven they were capable of anything. The question, Dan continued, is what we do with you now. You've seen things you shouldn't have seen, heard things that could cause misunderstandings. Like the truth about what you did to my daughter. Dan's smile returned. Your daughter enjoyed our time together. She's very mature for her age. Very responsive. Craig's control finally snapped. He lunged at Dan, but Poole was ready. A single blow to Craig's kidneys dropped him to his knees, gasping in pain. Now, Nelson chided. Violence solves nothing. We're civilized men here. As Craig struggled to breathe, he heard Dan's voice close to his ear. You should have taken my advice and stopped investigating me. Now your whole family is going to pay the price for your obsession. The network members discussed Craig's fate with the detached professionalism of men planning a business meeting. They would eliminate him, of course, but they needed to be careful about the timing and method. What they didn't know was that every word was being recorded and transmitted to Emmanuel's command center, where it was being simultaneously forwarded to Joseph Burton's federal task force. Craig's apparent capture wasn't a failure of his plan. It was the final piece. Chapter 6, The Reckoning begins. As Dan's network debated Craig's fate, they remained unaware that Emmanuel Christian was monitoring their every word from his mobile command center. The surveillance equipment Craig carried wasn't just recording, it was transmitting everything in real time to multiple law enforcement agencies across 3 states. But Craig had planned for more than just evidence gathering. His apparent capture was designed to make the network feel secure, to encourage them to reveal information they'd normally keep hidden. The federal task force knows about you, Craig told them, his voice strained from Poole's assault, but his words carefully chosen. They've been watching your network for months. Judge Nelson's expression shifted from confidence to concern. You're bluffing. Agent Joseph Burton, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Task Force designation, Fallen Angels. Ring any bells? The reaction was immediate and telling. Several network members exchanged worried glances, and Craig knew his intelligence had hit its mark. You're lying, Dan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Craig pressed his advantage. Burton's been tracking your encrypted communications for 6 months. He knows about the safe houses, the financial transfers, the victim testimonies you've been suppressing. What Craig didn't mention was that Burton's investigation had been stalled by jurisdictional issues and lack of direct evidence. But the network members didn't know that, and their growing paranoia was exactly what Craig needed. District Attorney Chung was already reaching for his phone. We need to contact our sources, find out what the feds really know. No phones. Emmanuel's voice crackled through concealed speakers Craig had helped install earlier. The network members spun around, searching for the source of the sound. Gentlemen, Emmanuel continued, his voice echoing through Nelson's estate. You're surrounded. All communications have been jammed. All escape routes are blocked. And everything you've said in the past hour has been recorded and transmitted to federal authorities. The panic was immediate and beautiful. Judge Nelson rushed to his landline phone, only to find it dead. Mayor Hurst tried his cell phone with the same result. Dan Woodard looked like he was about to vomit. This is impossible, Nelson stammered. My security systems have been compromised for weeks, Craig said, climbing slowly to his feet. Andrew Poole's grip on his shoulder had loosened as the security chief tried to process what was happening. The sound of helicopters approaching from multiple directions filled the air, followed by the unmistakable rumble of heavily armed vehicles moving up the estate's long driveway. Federal Bureau of Investigation. A voice boomed through external speakers. The property is surrounded. Exit the building with your hands visible. Craig smiled as he watched 20 years of careful criminal enterprise collapse in real time. But his personal satisfaction was just beginning. There's something else you should know, he told Dan, who was staring out the window at the approaching FBI tactical teams. All those videos you've been collecting, the ones documenting your crimes, they've been uploaded to servers around the world. By tomorrow morning, every law enforcement agency, every news organization, and every advocacy group will have copies. Dan's face went white. That's impossible. My security was compromised the day you threatened my family, Craig finished. Emmanuel's been inside your systems for weeks. Every file, every communication, every financial transaction, all of it documented, all of it preserved, all of it admissible in court. The front door exploded inward as FBI tactical teams entered the estate. Agent Burton's voice echoed through the house. Everyone on the ground. Hands visible. This is a federal operation. But Craig wasn't finished with his revenge. As the network members were forced to the ground and zip-tied, Craig approached Dan with deliberate slowness. "You asked my daughter if she was scared," Craig said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Now I'm asking you the same question." Dan was trembling, his perfect composure shattered by the reality of his situation. The man who'd terrorized children was reduced to a quivering mess by the prospect of facing consequences for his actions. "Please," Dan whispered, "we can make a deal. I have information, connections. I can help you." Craig knelt down, so he was at eye level with Dan. "My 8-year-old daughter showed more courage than you're showing right now. She called for help when she was scared. Who are you going to call?" Agent Burton approached Craig with a mixture of professional respect and personal satisfaction. "Mr. Stevens, I need you to come with us for debriefing. But I wanted you to know, what we've gathered tonight will put all of these men away for life." As federal agents led the network members out in handcuffs, Craig felt a satisfaction deeper than anything his law enforcement career had ever provided. But this was only the beginning of Dan Woodard's punishment. The public exposure would be devastating, careers destroyed, families shattered, reputations obliterated. The legal proceedings would be lengthy and humiliating, with every detail of their crimes exposed in open court. But Craig had planned for more than just justice. He'd planned for complete destruction. Over the next several days, as news of the network's arrest dominated headlines, Craig's additional preparations came to fruition. Property records he manipulated ensured that civil asset forfeiture would seize everything the network members owned. Social media accounts he'd hacked began posting their criminal confessions to friends and family members. Financial records he'd obtained showed a pattern of money laundering that would trigger additional federal investigations. Dan Woodard, who'd thought himself untouchable just a week earlier, found himself facing hundreds of federal charges, civil lawsuits from dozens of victims' families, and complete social ostracism. But Craig's masterpiece was yet to come. Chapter 7. Personal Justice. The federal arrests were just the beginning of Craig's comprehensive revenge against Dan Woodard and his network. While the FBI processed the evidence and built their cases, Craig implemented the more personal aspects of his plan. 3 days after the raid on Nelson's estate, Dan was released on bond, a decision that surprised everyone except Craig, who'd been counting on it. Dan's high-powered attorneys had argued successfully that he wasn't a flight risk, given his community ties and cooperation with authorities. What they didn't know was that Craig had orchestrated Dan's release through carefully placed pressure on the federal magistrate. He wanted Dan free, because what he had planned required Dan to be in the world, experiencing every moment of his destruction. Craig had spent months studying Dan's psychology, learning his fears and weaknesses. Dan's greatest vulnerability wasn't physical. It was his desperate need to maintain control and his terror of public humiliation. Craig began with Dan's professional reputation. Using Emmanuel's hacking skills, he ensured that Dan's arrest record and criminal allegations appeared on every background check system in the country. Job applications were automatically flagged, housing applications were denied, and credit applications were rejected. Within a week, Dan lost his consulting contracts, his professional licenses, and his business relationships. The carefully constructed identity that had taken him years to build crumbled overnight. But Craig was just getting started. Tyrone Clayton's investigation had revealed that Dan maintained financial accounts under multiple identities. Using forged documents and Emmanuel's digital manipulation, Craig systematically emptied these accounts, transferring the money to victims' advocacy groups and child protection organizations. Dan's assets vanished like smoke, leaving him unable to pay for his defense attorneys, his mortgage, or even basic living expenses. The social destruction was even more thorough. Craig had identified everyone in Dan's life: coworkers, neighbors, casual acquaintances, even his barista at the local coffee shop. Each received anonymous packages containing documentation of Dan's crimes, complete with photos and video evidence. Dan's church expelled him. His gym revoked his membership. His neighbors organized petition drives to force him to move. Everywhere he went, he encountered people who knew exactly what he'd done. The psychological pressure was relentless and calculated. Craig had studied military interrogation techniques and psychological warfare tactics, adapting them for his purposes. He wanted Dan to experience the same helplessness and terror that Emma had felt. Emmanuel established digital surveillance that monitored Dan's every electronic communication. When Dan tried to reach out to former associates for help, Craig ensured those communications were intercepted and the recipients received additional evidence of Dan's guilt. When Dan attempted to find new housing, landlords received anonymous tips about his criminal history. When he applied for jobs, employers received detailed packets about his arrests. Dan was trapped in a shrinking circle of isolation and despair, exactly as Craig had intended. But the most personal element of Craig's revenge was still to come. Using Tyrone's skills, Craig had tracked down Dan's estranged father, a man named William Slaughter who'd abandoned Dan and his mother when Dan was 12 years old. William was now a retired minister living in a small town in Montana, completely unaware of his son's crimes. Craig arranged for William to receive a comprehensive package documenting Dan's activities, along with a letter from Emma describing what Dan had done to her. The package included a phone number where William could reach Craig if he wanted to discuss his son's actions. The call came 3 days later. "Mr. Stevens," William's voice was heavy with grief and shame. "I got your package. I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, Reverend Slaughter. I just thought you should know what your son became. I abandoned him when he was a boy. Maybe if I'd stayed, if I'd been a better father." Craig felt no sympathy for the old man. "Your son made his choices as an adult. He chose to hurt children. He chose to hurt my daughter. What can I do? How can I make this right?" Craig had been hoping for this question. Write him a letter. Tell him you know what he's done. Tell him you're ashamed of him. Tell him he's no longer your son. The psychological impact on Dan was devastating. The letter from his father arrived the same day Dan was evicted from his apartment for non-payment of rent. Emmanuel's surveillance captured Dan's breakdown as he read his father's words of rejection and condemnation. Craig watched the surveillance footage with cold satisfaction. Dan Woodard, who'd terrorized children with impunity, was finally experiencing consequences for his actions. But Craig's revenge wasn't finished. He'd saved the most personal element for last, a direct confrontation that would give Dan one final chance to understand exactly why his life was being destroyed. Craig arranged to meet Dan at a diner on the outskirts of town, far from any witnesses or surveillance. Dan arrived looking haggard and desperate, the polished confidence he'd once projected completely gone. "You did this," Dan said without preamble. "The arrests, the financial problems, the social ostracism. This is all you." Craig didn't deny it. "Every bit of it." "Why?" "The legal system is handling this. I'm going to prison. Isn't that enough?" Craig studied Dan's face, seeing fear and confusion where once there'd been arrogance and cruelty. "You hurt my daughter," Craig said simply. "You violated her, traumatized her, and then you threatened my family when I tried to seek justice. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" "I'm sorry," Dan said, though Craig could tell the words were calculated rather than sincere. "I know I made mistakes, but destroying my entire life won't undo what happened." "You're right," Craig agreed. "It won't undo Emma's trauma, but it will ensure you never hurt another child. And it will show Emma that her father fought for her when the system failed." Craig leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You asked Emma if she was scared when you were abusing her. For the rest of your life, every time you feel afraid, every time you feel helpless, every time you wonder if things could get worse, remember that feeling. That's what you did to my little girl." Dan's face crumpled, and for a moment Craig saw him as he really was, not a master manipulator or protected predator, but a broken man facing the consequences of his actions. Craig stood to leave, but Dan grabbed his arm. "Please, I'll do anything. I'll confess to everything Cooperate completely. Just make it stop. Craig looked down at Dan's desperate face and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. It's too late for deals. You had your chance to face justice with dignity. Now you'll face it on my terms. As Craig walked away, he knew Dan's punishment would continue long after the legal proceedings ended. The network of protection was gone, the financial resources exhausted, the social isolation complete. Dan Woodard would spend the rest of his life knowing that every loss, every humiliation, every moment of fear was payment for what he'd done to Emma Stevens. And Craig was far from finished with him. Chapter 8, The Final Trap. 6 months after the raid on Judge Nelson's estate, the federal trials were proceeding exactly as Craig had orchestrated. The network members were turning on each other with predictable desperation, each trying to negotiate better deals by providing evidence against their former associates. Judge Patrick Nelson received a 25-year sentence after his gambling debts and corruption were exposed. District Attorney Ernest Chung faced similar charges and was looking at life in prison. Mayor Bob Hurst had already pled guilty to multiple counts of conspiracy and child exploitation. But Dan Woodard remained defiant. Despite overwhelming evidence, despite the testimony of multiple victims, despite video documentation of his crimes, Dan had rejected every plea offer and insisted on going to trial. His new court-appointed attorney, his high-powered legal team having abandoned him when his funds dried up, was preparing a defense based on entrapment and prosecutorial misconduct. Craig knew exactly why Dan was fighting so hard. He still believed he could win, still thought his superior intelligence and manipulative skills could overcome the evidence against him. Craig was about to disabuse him of that notion permanently. The key to Craig's final trap had been planted months earlier, during the chaos following the arrests. Emmanuel Christian had discovered that Dan maintained a secret storage unit under a false identity, containing backup drives with evidence of crimes dating back 15 years. Instead of turning this information over to the FBI immediately, Craig had chosen to wait. He wanted Dan to feel secure in the knowledge that this evidence remained hidden, to build his defense around the assumption that the prosecutors only had what they'd seized during the raid. Dan's court-appointed attorney, Willard Carey, was competent but overwhelmed. He'd built his defense strategy around challenging the admissibility of the surveillance evidence and claiming that Dan had been entrapped by Craig's investigation. What Carey didn't know was that Craig had been feeding him information through carefully orchestrated leaks, guiding his defense strategy in exactly the direction Craig wanted it to go. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February. Craig sat in the gallery with Christina and Emma, watching as Dan entered the courtroom in an ill-fitting suit, his face gaunt from months of stress and social isolation. Emma had requested to attend the trial, despite her therapist's concerns. At 9 years old, she'd shown remarkable resilience, and she wanted to see the man who'd hurt her face justice. "That's him, isn't it, Daddy?" she whispered as Dan took his place at the defense table. "That's him, sweetheart. But he can't hurt you anymore." The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. FBI agent Joseph Burton testified about the network's operations and the evidence gathered during their investigation. Dr. Agnes Koch provided expert testimony about Emma's trauma and recovery. But the defense's strategy became clear during opening statements. Carey was arguing that Dan had been manipulated and entrapped by Craig's investigation, that the evidence had been obtained illegally, and that his client was the victim of a vindictive father's obsession. It was exactly what Craig had expected. On the third day of testimony, Carey called his first character witness, William Slaughter, Dan's estranged father. Craig had anticipated this move and had prepared accordingly. William took the stand reluctantly, his aged hands shaking as he was sworn in. Under Carey's questioning, he testified about abandoning Dan as a child, expressing regret for his failures as a father and suggesting that those failures had contributed to Dan's psychological problems. But on cross-examination, the prosecution revealed William's recent letter to Dan, the one Craig had orchestrated, in which the old minister had disowned his son completely. "You wrote to your son that you were ashamed to share his name," the prosecutor read, "that his actions were an abomination before God and man. Do you remember writing those words?" William's face crumpled. "I was angry. Upset. I didn't mean. So you were lying then, or you're lying now? The contradiction destroyed William's credibility and damaged Dan's defense. But Craig's masterpiece was still to come. On the fifth day of trial, as Carey prepared to rest his defense, Craig activated the final phase of his plan. Anonymous tips led police to Dan's secret storage unit. Inside, they found terabytes of video evidence documenting hundreds of crimes against dozens of children. The evidence was so extensive and damning that even Carey couldn't argue against its authenticity. But the timing of the discovery wasn't coincidental. Craig had arranged for it to be found during the trial, when Dan's defense was already committed to their strategy, too late to change course. The impact on Dan was visible to everyone in the courtroom. As the prosecutor introduced exhibit after exhibit from the storage unit, Dan's composure finally cracked completely. "This is impossible," he whispered to his attorney, loud enough for the jury to hear. That storage unit was secure. No one knew about it. Carey tried to salvage the situation by requesting a recess, but the damage was done. The jury had heard Dan essentially confess to maintaining a secret cache of child pornography. But Craig had saved the most devastating evidence for last. Among the files in the storage unit was a detailed journal Dan had kept, documenting his crimes and his thoughts about his victims. The entries about Emma were particularly graphic and disturbing, describing her fear and pain in clinical detail while expressing Dan's satisfaction at her suffering. As the prosecutor read excerpts from the journal aloud, Emma squeezed Craig's hand tightly but didn't look away. She wanted to hear everything, to understand completely what had been done to her and why. Dan's reaction to his own words being read in court was everything Craig had hoped for. The man who'd terrorized children with calculated cruelty was reduced to sobbing wreck, begging the judge to make it stop. But there was no mercy for Dan Woodard, just as there had been no mercy for his victims. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning with guilty verdicts on all counts. Dan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, to be served in a maximum security facility where his crimes would be well known to the other inmates. As the bailiff led Dan away in shackles, he looked back at Craig with a mixture of hatred and broken despair. Craig met his gaze steadily, allowing Dan to see the cold satisfaction in his eyes. Dan had learned too late that there were consequences for harming Craig Stevens' family, consequences that went far beyond anything the legal system could provide. But even as Dan began his life sentence, Craig's revenge was still not complete. Chapter 9. Justice Served. 2 years after Dan Woodard's conviction, Craig Stevens stood in his backyard watching Emma play with their new puppy. At 11 years old, she was thriving, excelling in school, making friends, and showing no signs of the trauma that had once defined her life. The physical scars had healed. The psychological ones were managed through continued therapy and the unwavering love of her family. But most importantly, Emma had seen justice serve in a way that proved to her that she mattered, that her pain mattered, and that people who hurt children would face consequences. Craig's phone buzzed with a message from Warren Young. "Thought you want to know? Dan Woodard was found dead in his cell this morning. Apparent suicide." Craig read the message twice, then deleted it. He felt no grief for Dan's death, but no particular satisfaction either. Dan's punishment had been complete long before he'd taken his own life. The network that had protected Dan was completely destroyed. Judge Nelson had died of a heart attack 6 months into his sentence. District Attorney Chung had been murdered by another inmate who'd lost his own child to abuse. Mayor Hurst was serving his sentence in protective custody, a broken man who'd lost everything he'd ever valued. But Craig's most successful revenge had been against the system that had failed his family. Using the evidence gathered from Dan's network, Joseph Burton's federal task force had exposed corruption in dozens of jurisdictions across multiple states. Judges were removed, prosecutors were indicted, and law enforcement agencies were reformed. The case had become a model for how to investigate and prosecute organized child exploitation networks. Craig had been invited to consult with law enforcement agencies around the world, sharing the techniques he'd developed to expose and destroy predator networks. He'd turned his rage into a mission, his need for personal revenge into a systematic campaign for justice. Christina joined him on the deck, slipping her arm around his waist as they watched Emma play. "Any regrets?" she asked quietly. Craig considered the question seriously. He'd broken numerous laws, destroyed multiple lives, and abandoned every principle he'd once held about justice and due process. "No," he said finally. "None at all. The legal system had failed Emma when she needed it most. The authorities had been corrupted, the networks of protection had been too strong, and the predators had felt themselves untouchable. Craig had proven them wrong in the most permanent way possible." Emma ran up to them, the puppy trailing behind her. "Daddy, can we go to the park?" "Of course, sweetheart," Craig said, lifting his daughter in his arms. "Anything you want." As they prepared to leave, Craig reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The scared, traumatized little girl who'd called him that night 2 years ago had grown into a confident, happy child who understood that her father would always protect her. The man who'd hurt her was gone. The network that had protected him was destroyed. The system that had failed her had been reformed. Justice had been served, not the sanitized, procedural justice of courtrooms and plea bargains, but the raw, personal justice of a father protecting his child. Craig had learned that sometimes the law wasn't enough. Sometimes justice required a willingness to step outside the system, to fight on terms the predators didn't expect, to use their own weapons against them. He'd sacrificed his faith in institutions, his respect for legal procedures, and his belief in the inherent goodness of authority figures. In return, he'd gained something more valuable: the absolute certainty that he would do anything to protect his family. As they drove to the park, Emma chattering happily in the back seat about her plans for the day, Craig made a silent promise. He would continue his work exposing predator networks, continue his mission to protect children who had no one else to fight for them. Because he'd learned the most important lesson of his life. When the system fails, sometimes good people have to become dangerous people. And Craig Stevens was very, very dangerous to anyone who threatened children. The father's reckoning was complete, but his mission had just begun. Years later, when other parents found themselves betrayed by systems that promised protection but delivered only bureaucracy and failure, they would hear whispered stories about a man who'd made predators afraid, who'd turned the hunters into the hunted. They would hear about Craig Stevens, and they would know that justice, real justice, was possible, even if it came at a price that few were willing to pay.